I remember reading somewhere, if a small lie is challenged further, it can stray into far bigger and more serious lies. These lines are accurate, but in my understanding, it suggests one to never lie, even if it's a white one. In my experience, sometimes lying is necessary to avoid chaos, such as when you're trying to spare someone's feelings from laughing at a joke you didn't find funny, or if there are some lies spoken to protect yourself for someone else. Whether it is a correct one that shouldn't lie, but sometimes with a good cause in mind that doesn't harm others, lying isn't bad. Up until my teenage years, I hated the tale of Pinocchio. Not only because the 1940s movie I saw felt alarming as a kid, but also for the tale's misguided morals by people. While I understand now as an adult that the lessons were about being a good kid, telling us not to listen to strangers, focus on learning, and never take the easy way out, what I always heard was never to lie or your nose would end up like Pinocchio. Not just from my parents, but from my teachers as well. Trust me, the feeling it planted inside me was terrifying, which made my childhood a mess, because with the constant fear in my mind that my nose would grow large, I didn't lie at all, not even the small little white ones. That was the reason I couldn't make friends until I learned to lie, when needed judging by the called situation. Even after realizing the correct morals of the tale, I never could come to like the story, and still felt the same, looking at how I would never be able to get free from the guilt that someone ended up dead because of that. I would be 7 or 8 at the time, and I was a pretty naive kid even at that age. As I mentioned earlier, I couldn't make friends because I seemed like a rude brat to others. There was also the factor of moving around a few times because of my father's job, which would also add to the list of hard things I went through. Anyway, it was the 3rd time we moved, and I was transferred to a different school. But as always, I couldn't make the first impression, looking at how I could lie politely past a few kids' weird appearances. I didn't understand why teachers ask such things as to compliment others on the first day to make friends when we don't even know them. I felt like an outsider in that school, looking at how I didn't know any of them. At least in my previous school, there was Ricky, who was sort of my friend, and needless to say, the kids here treated me as an outsider too. On the 6th day of school, a girl approached me who seemed rather cute, but I couldn't talk to her, and just walked away, because I knew I would only make it worse if she asked me any questions. The girl seemed to have a reputation for being overly friendly and the cheerful type, which made sense looking at how she approached me even after hearing all the gossip, and continued passing me smiles every time our eyes met. There were bullies in every school, doesn't matter where you go, and it was the same with this school as well. And I had become the major target because of my explicit honesty, so I started getting beaten up every once in a while. At the time, I had no idea how this school had more bullies than an average one, and as a result, the school's janitor, who was probably in his 20s, was getting the same treatment as me by the older kids. It was one day when I was in class, I noticed that same cute girl who tried to talk to me. She looked pale, probably under the weather or something. That was when the janitor walked in looking like a raging bull with a gun in his hands. Kids started screaming and running out of the classroom, leaving the girl who hid under a bench and me sitting on the desk frozen. "Where is that jerk, sister? How dare he hurt my Bella? I will show him how it feels to lose someone you love," he started screaming and looking around the classroom like some psycho on the loose. I knew Bella was the stray cat who I noticed him feeding a few times, but I couldn't understand why he was making such a fuss over her. "Hey kid, have you seen a girl with red hair?" he asked me while pointing a gun at me. Unable to understand what to say since telling the truth would only harm the red-headed girl hiding under the last desk, I stayed silent. "Don't test my patience. I won't hesitate to shoot you." As he threatened me with a growling voice, it made a shiver run down my body. I nodded in yes. "Good boy. Now tell me where she is," he asked against gritted teeth. Tears started falling from my eyes. I started crying loudly, because I knew where she was, and I didn't want to tell him. But if I lie, my nose would grow longer, which would make him know about the truth and he would shoot both of us. As I noticed him putting his finger on the trigger, I got scared that he was going to shoot me first, so I pointed my finger in the girl's direction while bawling my eyes out. The man walked there at a slow and frightening pace and grabbed the girl's hair, pulling her outside. I remember seeing the girl's face paler in comparison to what I saw earlier as she removed her stuffed hands from her mouth and let out a scream. "Sorry, kid. It's not your fault. I'm only doing this because your brother is making my life hell, and this school needs to know what bullies can do to people like me who have IED. These words followed a loud bang, along with the girl's scream, which went silent after a few seconds. I remember collapsing from the sudden trauma, which was too much for a 7-year-old, and then I woke up in the hospital. I didn't speak a word for a few days. I didn't want to go back to school either, since I blamed myself for her death. But most importantly, I learned my lesson that always telling the truth can cause problems as well as lying does. I felt even worse when my nose didn't grow when I lied for the first time, even though I was secretly hoping it would, realizing I could have saved her life. My guilt was turning into hatred toward Pinocchio, and ever since then, I started learning about the white lies until I became good at them. I still stand by the morals of not lying, but the line that I added to the moral is lying isn't always bad if done with good intentions.
One night, when I was going through my Snapchat and talking to my friends over it, I noticed a girl from my school sending me snaps that I never opened. It was weird though. I didn't remember adding her to my Snapchat, but it was clear that I did add her. I just don't remember it. Out of curiosity, I opened her chat and started opening up her snaps. It started with cute pictures of her, and then after a few snaps, there were some lead pictures in her that showed her private parts. Some of them contained text saying that, why am I not seeing her snaps? Then it started getting creepy because of her self-harming pictures. I guess she was on my chat when I opened it because she sent a text immediately saying, "Finally." I texted her, "Sorry, but I'm straight," and I instantly closed her chat before she could send another text or snap, and decided not to open them again. I could not understand why she was sending me those snaps and messages, even though I'd never talked to her in my life. There was only one time during summer class when I came across her because our classes were combined for that day. Apart from that one brief encounter, I'd never seen her ever again. Even that day, I was entirely focused on myself and enjoying myself with my friends only. After scrolling through the internet and chatting with my friends, I put my phone aside and went to sleep. Before sleeping, I noticed her sending me multiple snaps and text messages, so I turned off the data connection. The next morning, after waking up, I first took a shower and then went straight to the kitchen. Something was smelling very good. I looked at my mom breaking pancakes and ham sandwiches with maple syrup. I smiled at her for making my favorite breakfast this morning and walked towards the table. After a while, Father walked downstairs for breakfast and started asking me and Hannah about our studies and how everything's going. After breakfast, we got ready and headed over to where our school bus was supposed to be. I was in 10th grade while Hannah was in 8th grade. We waited for around 10 minutes for the bus to arrive, and as we were walking, I fixed Hannah's hair, which was sticking out a bit. When we reached school, Hannah and I headed in the direction of our classrooms. The day was going pretty normal, and I'd completely forgotten about that girl from Snapchat last night. It was our English class when our homeroom teacher walked in and called out my name, asking me to follow him to the principal's office. As we were walking towards the principal's office, he kept asking me these weird, uncomfortable questions if I were involved with someone or not in our school, etc. I simply replied to his every question with my head nodding or shaking in either a yes or no response. He entered the principal's office and I noticed him looking all worried and sweaty, which was a rare sight to see him in because I'd always seen him either calm or angry, and someone's parents were sitting across him in the chairs with teary eyes. It was a confusing turn of events for me because I did not understand what I was doing in this scenario. I had never had a problem with anyone in our school, nor did I bully anyone. So why in the world would some emotional looking parents be sitting across the principal's chair and summoning me here. Lizzie, I have some questions to ask you. Do you know Lena by any chance? As he asked me this, I looked at him with even a more confused expression than ever before and shook my head no. That was when they revealed that Lena was a student in our school who had committed suicide last night. Before her death, she had cut and carved Lizzie's name under her arms. That was the reason why they were asking me these questions. When her mother showed me her picture, I immediately recognized it to be the girl from last night. I told them everything truthfully, including that I don't know her very well and had never even talked to her in my life. After questioning me for another hour or so, they let me go to class. Everyone looked at me with questioning looks on their faces, which I ignored, of course. I was completely freaked out by the fact that she had killed herself over I don't know what. And that was when I remembered her sending me snaps and texts, saying last night over Snapchat. The school did not allow electronic devices, so I did not bring them in with me. I was distracted the entire time and kept waiting for school to end. The last period was history, and as soon as it ended, I ran towards the bus, only to realize that it wouldn't start until all the students had boarded the bus. I impatiently waited for every last student to board the bus, and as I was getting closer to my home, my heartbeat was getting faster and heavier from this scary feeling that I was having at that very moment. I directly went to my room, and after reaching home, I locked my room's door from the inside and turned on my phone. I kept staring at my phone thinking if I should check the messages or not, and after a long debate with myself for about an hour, finally opened up her chat with trembling hands. There were multiple snaps of her crying and asking me to give her a chance, and then she sent me some threatening texts saying that she would kill herself if I don't respond. I started shaking as I was going through all these snaps and texts. There was one in which she was carving my name in her arms. I threw my phone with a crashing noise and screamed after checking the last text that she had sent me. The last message that she sent me was, "My death is on you, Lizzie."
Was it her? It was the day I finally got divorced after so many struggles. Carla, who had been threatening to take most of my assets, had lost, and watched her defeated face had lifted all my stress. I guess she was the only cause of my anxiety and depression, which was now gone. As I left the courtroom as a single and free man, I paused for a brief moment and took a deep breath. Inhaling the earthy smell, I could still feel the dampness in the air after the rainfall. Perhaps it was the rain that had helped my almost lost case. Whatever it was, I was happy. I turned in the direction where I'd parked my car while reaching my hand in my left pocket and fishing around for the keys. Once my hand touched the plastic shell, I grabbed it and pulled it out. Reaching my car, I pushed the unlock button on the key before opening the door and entering. Once I entered the key into the ignition, I reached the stereo and played my favorite song, singing along the lyrics before starting the drive. It took me about an hour to reach home, and since my entire day went in the court, it was finally time to cook dinner. It was a relief that I could be cooking for only myself from then on, and not a full-course meal for her too. I bet the man she cheated with wouldn't spoil her like I used to. Whatever, it was her loss. After deciding to cook lasagna, I started preparing for it. Once I finished layering it up, I topped the dish with mozzarella before putting it in the oven. As I was waiting for my food to be cooked, I heard the doorbell. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I wondered who it could be while walking to the front door. I tried seeing through the peephole who it was, but when I couldn't see anyone, I had to open the door to check. There was a package lying on the doormat. I didn't remember ordering anything, so it had to be someone who sent it. I grabbed the thing and checked for the sender's name or address, but there was nothing on it. I tore open the brown paper off the package, revealing a congratulations note and a porcelain statue inside. Guessing someone from my friends list must have sent it, I didn't think much about it and tossed the package to the side table. The timer alarm set off, and I walked to the oven before taking out the lasagna as the freshly cooked aroma filled my senses. After having my dinner, I headed to my bedroom to get some sleep. I'm an insomniac, so I knew sleeping would be hard, but for the past few days, I've been doing some yoga. It had been quite a few months since I started suffering, but that night was the first when I was able to fall asleep without the help of any sleeping pills. However, I was awakened around 4 in the morning by the noise of glass shattering. Panicked, I ran toward the source only to find the living room's window broken as it was shards spread across the nearby area. Alerted by whoever it was inside the house, I started looking around. That was when I noticed the side table where I'd put the package was empty. The person had taken the damn statue, possibly still hiding inside the house. I took out my phone and dialed 911, informing them about the possible break-in. The police arrived shortly and they searched the entire house, but despite the broken window and the stolen package, there was nothing missing. Since they couldn't find the culprit, they returned after telling me that I could call them if I found anything or anyone suspicious. The next day, I sealed off that window and installed a camera in the living room just in case something similar happened again. Following evening, when I returned from work, I found a familiar-looking package lying on the doormat once again. Picked it up and checked for the sender's name, but just like the previous one, there was nothing written on it. For some reason, I felt a strange fear crawling inside me as I started tearing the packaging, revealing the same contents inside as the previous package. There had to be some relation between this damn package and the mysterious break-in, so I decided to set up a hidden camera around the package. I took it inside, placing it on the table before I planted the cameras around it. Later that night, after dinner, I stood guard inside the living room, waiting for that person who broke in to do it again. However, the night went by and no one did. Around 4 in the morning, I finally dozed off, but the moment I did, there it was again. The crashing sound, jolting me up from my sleep. I ran there only to find the other window glass broken, and once again the package had disappeared. Since I had already planted the cameras, I went to check them out only to be horrified by the fact that each one of them had disappeared. The person who broke in stole my cameras too. I called the police and informed them about it. Once again, they came to check but couldn't find anything. The same incident kept repeating itself, and each time I would lay traps to catch the culprit, only to end up in the same situation. I'd call the police each time, only for the same results every time. Eventually, they stopped taking me seriously and thought I had some sort of mental issue. I tried explaining to them that I was not having hallucinations and those things truly happened, but they didn't believe me. With each passing day, my insomnia got worse, and falling asleep kept getting harder for me. As I'm writing my experience today, I have no idea when or where I last slept. Unlike before, I think I'm starting to hallucinate now, and I'm losing my mind. If you're reading this, please, if there's anything you could do to help before I completely go insane, you know what? I think it could be her still trying to make my life miserable. Please help me. I'm terrified.
I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this. My name is Jake Turner, and I used to be a martial artist with a promising future. But all that changed the day jealousy consumed me, leading me down a dark path that ended in tragedy. It all started a few years ago, when I met Anna at a local martial arts gym. She was a breath of fresh air, full of life and passion for the sport, and with a passion for sports. She also loved watching the Kung Fu Panda show because it greatly inspired artists like us. We became good friends, occasionally spending time together and watching our favorite Kung Fu Panda show, which had become a shared favorite for both of us. Our connection was instant, and soon we were inseparable. both inside and outside the gym. Our relationship flourished as we shared a love for martial arts and dreams of the future. As time passed, I started feeling insecure. Anna was getting a lot of attention for her skills and hard work, earning compliments from our teachers and classmates. Instead of being happy for her success, I allowed jealousy to grow inside me like a poisonous snake. One day, after a particularly intense training session, Anna approached me with excitement in her eyes. "Jake, I've been offered an opportunity to train with renowned martial artists in another city. It's the chance to take my skills to the next level," she said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. Instead of being happy for her, I felt jealous. Fear started to fill my heart, and I had some crazy thoughts. I couldn't handle the idea of her doing better than me and getting more recognition. Right then, I made a decision that would affect both our lives forever. As Anna shared her dreams, I started feeling angry. We were in the park where we usually talked about our future, with kids playing and birds chirping around. The pressure and the fear of losing her got to me, and I lost control. Suddenly, I took out a knife from my pocket. The shiny blade caught her attention, and confusion turned into fear on her face. "Jake, what are you doing?" she asked nervously, stepping away. I can still remember the desperation in her voice, but at that moment, my mind was filled with jealousy and crazy anger. I attacked her, stabbing her over and over while she begged for mercy. The peaceful park turned into a terrifying and horrible scene. As Anna's life faded away, I stood there with a knife, surrounded by the broken pieces of our dreams. The reality of what I had done hit me hard, and a deep feeling of guilt and regret replaced the irrational jealousy that drove me to commit such a terrible act. Full of panic, I fled the scene, leaving behind the life I once had and the woman I claimed to love. The city lights blurred as I drove away, and my mind raced with the weight of what I had done. I knew there was no going back. Days turned into weeks as I evaded the authorities, constantly on the move, and tormented by the memory of that fateful day. The guilt weighed heavily on me, and the faces of those who cared about Anna haunted my dreams. I became a shadow, a ghost on the fringes of society. One evening, as I walked through a small town, I overheard people talking in a diner. They were discussing Anna's murder, and the whole town was buzzing with the details of the crime. It was like everyone knew about it. The realization that I had become a fugitive, a monster, hit me hard, almost like being struck by a sledgehammer. The consequences of what I did are now impossible to escape. Feeling guilty, I eventually gave myself up to the authorities. The trial that came after was a mix of strong emotions: anger, sadness, and regret. The courtroom turned into a place where my life fell apart, and I had to face the results of the violence driven by my jealousy. Sitting in this chilly, lonely prison cell, I think about the decisions that brought me to this point. Jealousy, that sneaky feeling, wrecked everything I cared about. I ended Anna's lively presence with my actions, turning the martial artist with a bright future into someone convicted of murder. It's a heavy reality to face in this cold, confined space. The pain of realizing I can't fix the damage I did, and the lives I ruined, is really hard to carry. In the quiet of the night, I'm left alone with my thoughts, haunted by memories of a love that turned into a nightmare. If only I had figured out a way to overcome my jealousy, to be happy for Anna's success, instead of getting upset about it. Maybe we could have had a future together. Now, I face the silent emptiness of a shattered dream and the harsh reality of a life permanently stained by violence and regret. After getting out of jail, I realized I had lost my dream of becoming a kung fu master. The title and the path to mastery were gone because of what I did. Even though I served my time, the criminal instinct that led me to a dark place was still there, and the feeling of jealousy lingered. The dream I cherished was now out of reach, and the consequences of my actions had taken it away. I had to face the fact that the criminal instinct and jealousy were still a part of me, making it difficult to move forward and regain what I had lost. For years, I had been trying to overcome the jealousy within myself, and one day, I felt that I had changed, becoming a better person. A few days later, I re-enrolled in a martial arts, and once again, I found myself attracted to a lady. This time, however, I didn't feel jealous like before. Instead, her success began to inspire me. The funny part is that we both used to watch the Kung Fu Panda show together and found inspiration in it. I thought that maybe I had found my first love, and this thought made me quite happy. One day, while we were watching the Kung Fu Panda show together and spending time happily, she mentioned the opportunity to go abroad. She had been selected for a big tournament. Hearing this, for some unknown reason, the jealousy within me resurfaced, and I contemplated silencing her. I began to choke her, but a voice within me stopped me, and without causing her harm, I let her go. Since then, I never saw that girl again, and the artist within me has also died. Now, I am living in hiding like an ordinary person, battling the envy within me every day.
I sometimes feel like what I saw in the news about the boy stabbing the girl publicly to death could happen to me any day now. It won't be with a knife or anything. Well, you never know. It could be. But judging through my condition, it would be different. I can even picture the headlines now. A woman of the age of 32 was beaten to death by her husband. The stab marks appear to be from a broken alcohol bottle. Her in-laws knew what was going on behind that closed door, but decided to put a blind eye on them. This was not the first time I had pictured such a headline. Every time I was brutally beaten after his returns from one of those drinking parties, I would always stare at the wall for hours with my aching wounds thinking of such things. I knew he'd end up killing me one of these days, but I just wasn't sure what day it would be. He's a loving and devoted husband during the day when he's sober, but his personality takes a 180 turn at night when he beats me to a pulp. It's like he's an entirely different person after drinking, one I can't recognize. I couldn't stop my trail of thoughts as I wiped my tears and looked at him sleeping in our bed peacefully, while I sat on the floor with my aching body unable to move because of the twinging in my cuts and wounds. This was nothing compared to my constant mental agony. At least now I was sure that he would not touch me till the next time he drinks, but the perturbation I felt whenever he was outside or was going to be late was the kind of misery I don't want anymore. Looking at the shattered pieces of the broken bottle, I knew in my mind that I had to clean all this before morning, so he doesn't step on it after waking up. But a part of me wanted it to happen after everything he put me through. I looked over at the wall clock to see the time. It was 2 in the morning. 1 hour remained till our 4-year-old daughter Aisha woke up. So I somehow gathered the strength left in me, pulled out the glass pieces from my leg, and stood up. Before doing any cleaning, I went to apply disinfectant so it doesn't fester. Trust me, it hurts like hell cleaning all these wounds. Tears were still flowing at a constant pace, but I made sure to not let a single fragment of the voice out of my mouth. After I was done cleaning and applying disinfectant, I went to grab a broom, wiper, and dustpan to clean the mess he made. I returned to the room and gave a scan of all the whiskey spread on the floor before I started cleaning. I didn't want to sleep next to the man who had exhibited the embodiment of a monster in front of me a few hours ago, so I just sat on the sofa that was beside the wardrobe. But before I could put my head down, I heard Aisha's cry. She was in my mother-in-law's room where I had put her after she fell asleep because I had sensed the drunkenness in Ryan's voice over the call. As I was walking out of the room, I saw my mother-in-law carrying her to our room. She averted her eyes, knowing the state I was in because of his son. I didn't say anything either, but smiled knowingly, sending more guilt to her direction. I took Aisha from her lap and walked back to the room to console her. The morning came. I hadn't gotten a single wink of sleep, but I still went to the kitchen to make breakfast for everyone. Everyone knew my condition. but not a single one in the family came forward to say I didn't have to do it, or at least help me. When I carried the tray into the room to give breakfast to my husband, he had just gotten up. He looked at me, remembering what he did to me last night, and asked me to come closer to him. I knew what was going to happen when he leaned his head on my shoulder. He apologized as always. I gave him a forced smile without saying a word in response as I placed breakfast on the side table. It was Sunday, so I didn't have to go to work. I guess I forgot to mention that I work as a teacher in a nearby school, and my subject is science. I wanted to become a veterinarian, but I couldn't pursue it after my marriage, looking at how my husband was against it. But somehow he allowed me as a teacher. Anyway, my friend called me a few minutes earlier and told me that they would be dropping by, so I started preparing snacks for them. Since I don't have any strength left to cook, I just prepared the store-bought ones. She arrived in the evening with her 3 cute daughters and started telling me about how she had finally gotten approval on her leave, and that she'd be heading to her hometown with her family. She was working as a radiographer in the Holly Family Hospital and also had a degree in homeopathy. Looking at how her husband let her complete her studies even after marriage and the amount of support he was providing her, I couldn't help but feel envious. The way she blushed to her ears even after 3 kids on the slightest mention of her husband's name said so much about how he treated her. She didn't need to boast about it. Anyone with eyes could see how happy she looked. I've always seen her husband treating her with respect, addressing her as Op when talking to her. Op means you, and this word states a form of respect. I was in the kitchen preparing for dinner after my friend left when I received a phone call from Ryan. He informed me that he would be coming home late as he had encountered one of his old friends. I knew he was going to drink the moment he said that. You would think that Muslims don't drink since it's haram, just like Maram's husband, but no. These days, not many people are real Muslims just because they claim to be. Just take my husband as an example. He not just drinks, but he beats his wife and the mother of his child. My body started to shiver. I started getting panic attacks as I realized that this was going to be another barbarity of his. I had to escape it by any means necessary. I looked around the house, only to find everyone in the living room locked inside watching some drama together on the television. It was my chance. I went to my room, packed mine and Aisha's things, and before anyone could notice, I got out of the house. I strode across the road, still scared of getting discovered. The only thing I did was break my SIM card and buy a new one. Then I informed my father about everything, including that I had left home yet again. I had run away multiple times before and went to my parents' house in Bihar, India, but ended up returning after hearing his cries and pleas along with the promises to never harm me before. The intention of me running then was to make him stop hurting me. But this time, I was determined to never return, no matter what. This time, I was ready to get a divorce from him, and my father, as always, was going to support my decision.
I suppose it's possible that I have been a little overprotective of my daughter. Over the last year or so, I've been trying to cut the cord, so to speak, and allow my daughter to have more independence. Almost a year ago, I allowed her to have a sleepover for her birthday party. She was turning 12, and I knew most of her friends, and they were all good kids. All but one. Her friend that I'm going to call Katie in this story was just that typical bad news girl. She came from a pretty rough family, and it showed. My daughter was always friends with her, but the older they got, I could see Katie going down a darker path. A few weeks before the party, Katie got suspended for hitting a teacher. The only reason that she didn't get expelled was because my daughter wrote a letter to the principal, basically begging them to give her another chance, and they did. I was on the fence about letting Katie come over, but my daughter begged me and I gave in. And what harm could a 12-year-old girl cause in one night? The night came, and it was just me alone responsible for the girls who came over. My husband works overnight, so he wasn't going to be home until 8 in the morning. I was a little nervous about having all the kids in the house, but I trusted my daughter to be responsible and keep everyone under control, which, for the most part, she did. Even Katie was well-behaved and even respectful. She thanked me twice for allowing her to come over, When I was getting ready for bed, I checked in with the girls and told them to behave. As I was walking away, Katie said one last time with sort of a bit of mischief in her voice, "Thanks again for letting me come over." When I turned back and smiled, she looked at me in a sort of funny way, and I got the sense that she sort of ironically was thanking me now. I was hoping that my daughter didn't tell her that I didn't want her there, but I was sure that I was just overthinking this. At some point in the middle of the night, I heard a loud bang coming from down the hall. It was like the sound of a pan falling off the shelf or something. I froze for a minute thinking about the horrible idea of an intruder, and I went into bear mom mode and decided to investigate the noise. When I got into the hallway, I could hear the muffled sounds of whispers, and one of the whispers was very aggressive and angry sounding, but I couldn't make out the words. The other whisper was clearly the sound of someone whimpering. I could hear things like, "Please no," and "We don't have to do this." I didn't have any idea what to think at this point, and I turned the light on in the hallway and the whispers stopped immediately. I heard the light footsteps of jogging heading back in the direction of the living room. I still didn't know if those whispers were some of the girls or somebody else. I briskly made my way down the hall into the kitchen. I still haven't said anything, and the light was on and there was a pan lying on the counter. It looked like it must have fallen out of the strainer where it was drying. That must have been the noise that woke me up. As I was moving the pan back into the strainer, I noticed one of the steak knives was removed from the knife block that I kept on my counter. I'm very meticulous about my kitchen, so the fact that a knife was missing gave me an immediate pause. I rushed to the living room and was relieved when I saw all of the girls sleeping. I was wired after this. I was trying to figure out what on earth the two girls in the kitchen were talking about, and more importantly, why was a knife missing? I decided to stay in the kitchen and just read until the sun came up, which was only a few hours away at that point. I just felt like I needed to stay awake, just in case something might happen. Not long after, I made a cup of coffee and started reading. Katie came to the doorway and asked what I was doing awake. I told her I couldn't sleep and I was going to read in the kitchen. She looked annoyed and confused and eventually turned back around and went to sleep. I just assumed that she got up to use the restroom, but it didn't occur to me until later that when she confronted me in the kitchen, she never went to the bathroom. So she literally got up just to confront me, which, in hindsight, is a little weird. At least I think so. Morning finally came and all the girls were just being silly in the living room. I made them some pancakes and the strange uneasiness eventually faded away. One by one, the girls were getting picked up. I just happened to be standing near the living room when Katie was packing up her bag, and I noticed her putting the kitchen knife in her bag. I know I'm a coward, but I didn't say anything. Now say what you will, but in that moment, I felt genuine fear. Something was not right. Katie, who thanked me several times the night before, left and just looked at me when she did. I said goodbye and she turned and left without saying anything. Thankfully, nothing more happened regarding this story. Well, at least nothing that I know of anyway. I have no idea what Katie wanted to do with that knife, and I had no idea who the other girl crying was that night. I still have nightmares sometimes thinking about what would have happened if I didn't wake up that night. Did I potentially stop Katie from doing something really heinous? Was I the target? Now, I'm sure I'm overthinking this. My husband thinks it's a stretch to think a 12-year-old can be such a monster, and also is pretty frustrated at me for just letting her leave with some of our kitchenware. But I don't know. My gut is telling me another story completely. What do you guys think?
She was my best friend. What about you? What are you doing here? We were gathered near our cells, and the other cellmates were sharing their stories about how they got there when Carla, who's also a fellow prisoner, asked me, "My best friend's murder." As I said that, they all looked with shocked expressions on their faces. "You killed your best friend? What kind of a person are you?" Carla looked at me with a look of disgust, which did not bother me at all. Others started insisting that I tell them the story, so I began. I was not very well off and I used to work as a maid. Naomi was my neighbor, but unlike me, she was rich. She was a housewife, and her husband, Oliver, was a manager at some big firm. She was a nice woman, and we got along pretty well. She did not care that I was not a well-off person and treated me with nothing but kindness. She had a beautiful young sister, Margaret, who often used to visit her, and slowly the three of them became good friends. That was when I started to notice that Naomi's husband, Oliver, was not good to her. He often used to beat her and abuse her after coming home in drunk conditions. And one day, I saw him kicking her out after beating her severely. I took her inside and treated her wounds. While I was treating her wounds, I could tell by her face that she was extremely embarrassed that I saw her in this condition, and her eyes were filled with tears. I tried to comfort her by saying that everything will be alright, but instead of calming down, she started to cry even louder. I hugged her and asked her what had happened. She told me that her husband was loving towards her at first, but then he suddenly started to pull apart, and recently, he started to raise his hands at her. Hey, you know what? Let's cheer you up. I heard one of the houses where I worked there is a new sauna bathhouse that opened nearby. I called Margaret. Let's head there, the three of us. While I was saying that, I knew that it was out of my budget, but all I could think about that time was my best friend was suffering. I had to make her feel good, so I called her sister and asked her to meet us there while I practically dragged Naomi there along with me. When we were there in the sauna bath relaxing, Naomi told us about everything that she'd been suffering these days. She told us that her husband was acting differently and that she was thinking that he maybe started cheating on her. Naomi could not sleep for the past few days because she could not help but feel doubtful towards him for his strange behavior. After telling us about this, she felt a bit lighter, as if some burden has been lifted from her head. Why don't you make this our thing? Let's meet every Friday here and we can share our burdens with each other, Margaret said. But I refused, saying that I did not have that kind of money. Oh, come on, you're a best friend. We'll pay for you. Naomi held my hands and said, looking into my eyes with a pleading look. Okay, fine. I rolled my eyes and agreed while the two of them squealed in excitement. We started to meet every Friday and shared whatever troubles we'd had with each other. And one day, Naomi told us that she checked her joint account and a huge amount of money from her savings was missing. We could not understand why Oliver had to withdraw Naomi's money, even with the position that he was working on. Either he'd been fired or his earnings were getting spent somewhere else. We encouraged Naomi to confront him about this matter, as if anything goes wrong, she could call us right away. Naomi did not call us after that, so we thought that she must be busy or something. And the next Friday, when we went to the sauna baths, she did not show up there either. So we went to her house to ask about her. But Oliver told us that she wasn't there either. He told us that he thought that she was spending time with us for the past 2 days. I could tell that he was lying, so as soon as he closed the door, I turned towards Margaret. I'm sure he's lying. He's hiding something. Before I could say anything, she said to me, and I agreed with her. We decided to take the matters into our own hands and report him to the police the next thing in the morning. But the next day, we found out that he had already reported his missing wife. More than 15 days had passed and there was still no words from Naomi. So Margaret and I decided to check his house when he was not around to find some clues. So we waited for him to leave, and then we used the spare key that Naomi had given Margaret to sneak inside. We searched the entire house but couldn't find anything except that it was smelling like bleach, and the carpet in the living room also looked brand new. As we were looking around, we heard the sound of Oliver's car in the driveway and immediately left the house. We hid around the garden area and noticed him carrying a big suitcase to the house. After a few minutes, a model-looking like woman walked into the house. We could not talk there or in my house because I knew that Oliver would doubt us and he would play another trick like before. So we decided to meet at the sauna baths to discuss the plan. The next day, we met at the sauna, and as we were relaxing, I asked Margaret if she also thinks that Oliver might have killed Naomi. What do you think about that? From this question of hers, I figured that she did not think of such a possibility just yet. What do you think? The house smells like bleach, and the new carpet, and the mistress moves in when it hasn't even been a month since Naomi's disappearance? Margaret, I work as a maid, so I know that these rich people do cover up any crimes that they've committed. As I said that, Margaret's eyes teared up and hugged me while sniffling. I calmed her down, and we decided to report this to the police. The next day, I decided to go to Oliver's house to check up on the situation, so I went there and rang the bell. The other woman opened up the door, and then Oliver came from behind. I asked him about how he was handling Naomi's disappearance, but he looked annoyed about my question and rudely sent me off. I called Margaret, but she told me that the police went to her place asking questions about her involvement in Naomi's disappearance. After an hour or so, I was also called to the police station because Naomi's sister told them that the two of us were in the sauna house on Friday when we found out about her disappearance from Oliver. We also told them about my suspicion of Oliver, as he might be the one that killed her. The police went over to Oliver's house to catch him red-handed and to search his home, but they couldn't find anything either. I got frustrated and shouted at him, saying that he'd killed her because he was fed up with her and he used to beat her. How could you say that? I love Naomi more than anything, and I thought that she may have run off somewhere else, and I was just trying to move on. But you're saying that she's dead? How are you so sure? Wait for a second. Did you kill her? Pulled the trigger towards me, but I knew that he was lying and just trying to frame me. Police searched my house after Oliver asked them to, and shockingly, a knife laced with blood was found in the shower drawer of my kitchen. I never used that drawer, so I had no idea that he'd hidden that in my house, just to frame me. The police arrested me and sent the knife to the forensics labs. I don't know how he did it, but when the results came out, the blood was Naomi's, and there were faint traces of my fingerprints found on the knife. I asked Margaret to help me, and I told her that I didn't kill Naomi, but she did not help me, saying that she could not believe that I would do something like that. The police questioned me about Naomi's body, but I kept denying it till the very end. I was framed for the murder of my best friend, who I loved the most in the world, and was then sentenced to serve my time in prison. After listening to my story, Carla hugged me and apologized for saying that she judged me wrong. I nodded and went back to my cell. There was one thing that I could not understand, that except for Naomi and Margaret, no one else knew about the passcode for my house. And Naomi would never tell her husband. So how did he know? Was Margaret also involved in all of this? Is that how Oliver always knew what we were about to do next? But I was sure about one thing. I would not let them go, and I'd find out what happened to Naomi eventually. I will prove my innocence, no matter what it takes.
In my opinion, piercing is something only girls are supposed to do. It enhances their beauty, makes them look more attractive, and it also highlights their personalities. For a strange reason, I'm not attracted to girls who don't even have a single pair of piercings on their ears. Even if it's weird, I don't know. I do find that a turn-off point for me. I have dated multiple girls over Hinge, but going on more than one date has been rare over the years. Everything changed when I met Alice. It was like love at first sight, and even though she had no piercings whatsoever, I could imagine the parts of her body I wanted to penetrate to make those holes. The woman had a soft voice that could just melt your ears, smooth, clear skin, a slender figure, big doe eyes with thick eyelashes on them, and dark, long, silky straight hair. It was not like I was less in looks or anything. I was the kind of guy who could become famous without even trying, just alone with his talents. But her, she was the kind of girl guys like us desire to have. The first time I talked to her over Hinge, she gave off a rather boring vibe, so I thought maybe the person I was talking to wasn't a female in the first place, looking at how she didn't have her profile picture uploaded at all. There were all kinds of people on Hinge, so I figured it could be either another dude posing as a girl or a trans or something. I asked her out for a lunch date for one of the most crowded restaurants there, just to check if my hunch was correct. But the moment a girl in an olive drab dress walked to me, I just couldn't take my eyes off her. You wouldn't believe me, but as she was looking at the menu, I was trying to check her ears, which were hidden behind her black hair, to see if she had any holes in them. I ended up asking her about that during our conversation, and even without any piercings, I found her immensely attractive and started imagining what kinds of earrings I would like her to try on for me. I didn't mention such things to her since it could make her uncomfortable, and she might not want to meet on a second date. In any case, I enjoyed her company enough though. She engaged in a conversation lesser than one's supposed to, and often nodded or shook her head in response to my question. After we were done with our date, I offered to drive her home with no ulterior motive in mind, but she declined politely and took a cab. I was in a pretty nice mood as I was walking back to my house, and that was when I remembered I didn't have the things to pierce her ears yet, so I went to the store to buy them. And since I had no idea about how to do it, I needed some practice, and for that, I needed a few volunteers. The entire reason for me to learn to do it for her was that I did not want anyone's hand other than mine touching her smooth skin. I tried asking around for volunteers, but no one agreed, saying they would rather pay a professional if they wanted holes in their body instead of getting it messed up and infectious by someone like me. The next night, as I was walking at night to clear my mind, an idea popped up in my mind as I saw a girl walking alone in the park. I quietly approached her from behind and put a hand over her mouth so she couldn't be able to scream. After that, I proceeded to block the air out of her nose and mouth enough to make her pass out. Once I was done, I carried her to my apartment and tied her up in a chair along with wrapping a cloth around her ears and her mouth as well. Then I proceeded with piercing her ears, and since her nose was already pierced, I let it be. The first pair was uneven, so I tried making the second a bit upper to the ears, which also turned out to be uneven. Then I decided to move on to the third pair, and almost cussed loudly when it turned the same. I continued and ended up making 7 uneven pairs of holes in her ears, and unfortunately they had started to bleed, so I thought of taking a rest and carried her to where I found her first. The girl was still unconscious, and since she hadn't seen my face, I decided to wake her up before leaving her alone. Once she was up, she started panicking and telling me that someone kidnapped her. I acted surprised as if I had no idea anyone could do that. I bid her farewell after giving her advice about not roaming around at night. I proceeded with my plan a few more nights, practicing on a few more women, and at the end of the day, I finally perfected the art of piercing. It makes me feel guilty that so many innocent girls had to make such major sacrifices to make me perfect, but they could always close it if they didn't want to keep the holes. Anyway, I texted Alice and asked her out for dinner, but she didn't respond for the entire day, making me worried about her well-being. That evening, she texted back that she was busy with some family issues and would not be able to go on a date. I felt like my days of hard work would go in vain if she didn't meet me, so I asked what the problem was and if I could help in any way. My younger sister was attacked by some psycho at night and he kidnapped her to perform piercings on her ears. She's traumatized by the whole experience, and her ears have also gotten infected, so I filed a report against him. There was someone she saw, but as her condition was not good, she couldn't get a clear look. Cops have informed me that there are a few similar cases, and since they all saw a suspicious man afterward, I'm guessing they will visit the other victims and make a sketch as per their descriptions to catch him. I don't think you'll be able to help though, but if I do need anything, I'll text. This was the longest text she had written to me so far, and after reading it, I could feel my feet getting cold. It was almost felt as if someone snatched the land beneath them. If I didn't text back, it could raise suspicion, so all I did was, sure, take care of yourself. I couldn't care less for Alice anymore. All I could think of was I needed to get away from here as soon as possible. The next day, I booked a flight to my hometown, Oklahoma, and ran away. My family lived in the countryside, so it was the best hiding place for me. I knew I went chicken for something that probably had a few years of prison, but I'm not suited for living there. So here I am milking cows and feeding chickens, hoping to not ever get caught. If I knew my obsession could lead me into this mess, I would have quit it a long time ago. It was the day when I was finally going home for Christmas, and my flight tickets had been already booked by me using a mobile app. I was supposed to fly from California, Los Angeles to Denver, Colorado, and since it was a 3-hour flight, I made sure to properly hydrate myself. A night before my flight, I went shopping in a nearby market area from where I brought a few Christmas presents for my family. My little sister Lucy loved the Disney movie Frozen and was a huge fan of Olaf the Snowman, so I bought Olaf's stuffed toy for her. After coming back home, a bit tired and hungry from all the walking in the market, the first thing I did was to have dinner before I was to start packing. By the time I was finished, it was already 11 p.m., and since my flight was at 6 a.m. at dawn, I had to go to bed early. But as I was lying in bed, I couldn't sleep a wink due to the excitement and nervousness about going home after so long. Still, I was able to get some shut-eye before I woke up at 4 a.m. to get ready. After I was done, I booked a cab for the airport, and within a few minutes, my cab driver called to confirm my pickup location. He gave me another call when he reached the location, and as I was already waiting outside, I caught up to him. Upon reaching the airport, I went through all the necessary checking and procedures before boarding the flight. As I was done, they told me to wait in the lobby, so I went ahead and found a place to sit. While I was scrolling through my phone, I heard the announcement to board the flight. As I was scrolling through my Instagram feed, I saw a post that stated that there was a virus breakout in Wuhan, China, which was spreading at an alarming rate, and people were dying. I did feel bad for them as the feeling of sympathy rushed for a bit, but then I scrolled up. Little did I know at the time that it wouldn't just stop there. A man wearing a dark gray hoodie and a mask was sitting next to me, which I didn't even realize until I got up from my spot.
We were standing in a queue to board the flight, and they made a special announcement to wear masks. I didn't have one, so I asked an officer, "Excuse me, sir, may I know the reason for this?" He turned his head toward me and replied, "Ma'am, you might not have heard, but there's a virus outbreak across the globe, and the government just made it mandatory to wear masks. We're just following the orders, please cooperate with us." That was when I remembered they were providing masks at the entrance, and had sanitized our clothes and luggage as well.
We boarded the plane and went to our respective seats. From that moment onwards, several announcements were being made, but I couldn't focus on any one of them because of the person sitting next to me. It was the same person from the airport lobby with the dark gray hoodie, and by the looks of it, he was probably asleep. I couldn't tell as his face was covered with a mask, and he had his eyes closed the whole time. There was an uneasy feeling taking over me for some reason, so I tried to get some sleep. The flight reached Denver, Colorado on time, but at the airport there was a medical team with armed forces to make sure everyone gets tested for the virus. They were calling it coronavirus. Again, we had to stand in a queue, and one by one, all of us got tested. The virus had already spread across the world, and the World Health Organization had given some guidelines to follow. We had to comply with their rules for the safety of citizens and our families, and were told that we need to quarantine for a week before we can be allowed to go home. No one was ready to do this, especially me, since there were only 3 days left for Christmas, and I was eager to be with my loved ones. I couldn't stay there, so I went ahead and asked a woman who looked like a healthcare worker, "Ma'am, it's Christmas in 3 days and I have to go to my family. Can't we just go home? Why do we need to do this? On what basis are you making us quarantine? We're passengers, not criminals." She replied calmly, "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but we don't know which one of you might have brought the virus with you, and how many people might get affected by it." Another man in a white coat said, "We need to quarantine you at least until your test results come out." People started protesting and asking questions, but no one was agreeing to this, and I was among those furious ones since all of this made little sense to me. Why don't you quarantine the ones who brought the virus with them instead of doing this to the rest of us? I asked in a frustrated tone. The police officer at the airport got angry and said, "Listen here, lady. As we have been saying, we don't know which one of you has it yet, and this is for your safety, so it would be better if you stop this right now."
I got even angrier after that, and for some reason, I went straight to the man wearing the gray hoodie who sat next to me on the plane, and he was standing in a corner away from other people's eyes. Grabbing him by his collar, I started hitting his nose with brute force and didn't even realize how hard I was hitting him until he stumbled backward while holding his head, as if my punches hurt him a lot. I'm sure my delicate hands didn't hurt him that hard, so why is he behaving this way? I thought to myself.
A fight had already broken out among the passengers by now due to my rebellious act, and officers came forward to try and stop it, but people weren't ready to listen. All of a sudden, the man I punched in the gray hoodie passed out amidst the ruckus, putting a stop to my movements. No one seemed to notice him, and since police and healthcare workers were busy with their attempts to stop the fights that were going on, I went ahead to help him as I was feeling guilty about punching him.
I removed his mask and was shocked to see the stitches around his mouth that were now broken, and he was bleeding. By the looks of it, he probably had surgery around his mouth explaining why he was wearing a mask. As I noticed that no one had yet noticed him, as they were quite busy having arguments of their own, I quickly put back his mask on his face. The guilt for taking out my anger while thinking of him as the one with the virus and hurting him was taking over my senses, but at that moment I was too terrified to even think straight. While I was trying to figure out what to do, the medical staff noticed the fainted man and came running towards him. He asked me what happened while giving him first aid, and even though I knew it was my fault, I couldn't bring myself to tell the truth. So I lied and said, I don't know, I just found him like this. He probably got hit during the fight and he fell on the ground.
Is he going to be okay? I added. Other doctors and medical staff started to notice, and he was immediately taken to the emergency room. The rest of the passengers were taken to a nearby hospital where the quarantine arrangement was for over a week. I'm sure everyone had a hard time during that one long week, but none of them compared to what I went through, because I had submerged myself in guilt, and it was making me sick. After 3 days in quarantine, I couldn't even eat the food that was given to us since it almost felt tasteless. Deep down, I was mad at myself for beating up that guy at the airport and kept thinking about his well-being. Maybe the quarantine was my punishment for hurting him. Christmas passed, and I didn't feel anything about it. I just wanted to get out of that hospital room and run to my family. Finally, the punishment was over, and we were allowed to go home. But before I could get happy, karma hit harder than a rock as one of the medical staff came in while I was getting ready to get home with my report and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but you cannot leave as you can see here. You have been tested positive. Please cooperate with us as you need to stay in quarantine a bit longer." This is about the time when I first joined the Instagram and also learned a life lesson through that. Even though I was in 10th grade, I did not have a phone. My friends used to tell me about Instagram. That's how they could enjoy reels, share stories, chat, video calls, go live, etc. My father promised me that if I get at least 80% in the final exam, he would buy me a phone. So I studied day and night to prepare for the exam and was finally managed to score 89%. As promised, he bought me a smartphone. I asked my friends about Instagram and installed it. After that, I created my first Instagram account with the help of my friends. At the time, I did not know that there's a feature for the privacy on Instagram, so my profile was public and anyone could message me or see my posts. I was so happy from the fact that now I also had Instagram just like other people and could do all the fun stuff my friends used to do. I started posting my pictures over there and started coming live. But one day when I logged into the account, I saw many weird messages. They were dirty and some of them were cussing me. I opened the first message and it said, "Hey, I paid you online. When the hell would you showed me your nude live video?" I couldn't understand why this person has DM'd me such a message. I opened the next message and it was also saying something similar. Just like that, there were tons of messages blaming me for taking their money and not performing pornographic things for them. I had no idea what was happening to me. What had I done to make all these people so angry at me? I couldn't figure out the answer, and I was scared. That was when my friend Anna called me. She told me that someone had made a fake account of me and was scamming people by promising them live sexual videos. She told me the name of the account, and I searched for it. And when I found it, I saw dozens of almost nude pictures which had my face edited over them. I got scared. The first thing that came to my mind that if my parents found out these pictures, they would kill me. I also thought that everyone at school may have seen these pictures, and they may have misunderstood that it's me, just like the people who are messaging me. I called Anna and asked her, what should I do? She told me that the first thing I had to do was to make my account private. She instructed me throughout the process, and my account was finally private. She told me to report that account on Instagram. I reported that account and DM'd everyone who had messaged me, telling me that it was a fake account and I'm not that kind of person. And after that, I blocked everyone. But that's not the whole story. At the time, I thought that everything is back to normal, but I was wrong. One day, I got a message request from a guy. The name on his account was DarkGale09. His message was, "I was just checking your account and I thought you were pretty. Can we be friends?" I replied, "Of course we can," and started talking to him after that. One day, he asked me if we could meet. I was just a naive little girl, so I said yes. He asked to meet at the movie theater in the evening and watch a movie. We decided to meet on Saturday. The day when I was supposed to meet him, I wore a cute dress, tied my hair in a ponytail, and headed out to the movie theater. After reaching the theater, I waited for a bit, and then he came. We greeted each other and had a small talk, and then went inside the movie hall. The movie we were supposed to watch was not that famous, so there were only a few people in the theater. After the movie, he asked to walk me from the theater to the subway, and I agreed. When we were walking, I had this weird vibe. There's something really wrong was about to happen. I looked at Dale, and he had a weird expression on his face. I got nervous. Dale was practically a stranger to me until we met on the Instagram. He was leading me toward a secluded area, and my sixth sense was telling me to stop. I texted Anna that I might be in trouble and shared my location. When we reached to a place where absolutely no one was there, he started speaking. "You know, I was one of the victims of your scam. I sent you my 3 months allowance, but never got what was promised, so I'm going to take it on my own." After saying this, he looked at me with an evil grin and tried to grab me. I somehow managed to get away and started running. I was so scared and was regretting to ever trusting a stranger. As I was running away from him, he was following me the entire time. I immediately called Anna and told her about the situation. Anna told me that she got my text and is on her way with her brother. Her brother worked for the police. That was the reason I contacted her. She told me that they would be there within 15 minutes and asked me to stall him while staying safe. I was hiding in a parking lot and watching Dale search for me in frustration. That was when Dale suddenly spotted me and started to come towards me. I tried to run, but he caught me and pinned me down to the ground. As he was about to rip my clothes, a hand came from behind and pulled him away from me. It was Anna's brother. I was trembling in fear when Anna hugged me and told me that everything will be fine. After beating him and warning him thoroughly, Anna's brother let him go. After that, they dropped me at my home. Anna's brother gave me his number, saying that I can call him any time I'm in trouble. Ever since that day, I stopped responding to strangers' texts, and I learned a very important life lesson, that I should never trust a stranger.
After the party ended and everyone left, I was sitting among the pile of gifts, unwrapping and giving most of them disheartening looks. Apart from the thoughtless gifts, some were so unique and intelligent that I was impressed by the person who gave them. As I adorned my wrist with the charming handmade bracelet Ella had gifted me, I was drawn to an exceptional-looking gift box on the coffee table. It was beautifully wrapped with a red and gold ribbon, but no name tag was in sight. While inspecting the gift, I couldn't help but wonder who it was from and what was inside. Curiosity got the best of me, and I cautiously tore off the wrapping paper, revealing a stunning stuffed bear. Its fur was soft and fluffy, and its eyes gleamed like twinkling stars. I was in awe of its beauty and couldn't wait to add it to my collection of cherished gifts. However, I quickly snapped out of my trance and began to tidy up the mess of wrapping paper strewn across the living room floor before my clean freak mother caught me. After cleaning up everything, I went to my room to relax my body through a nice nap. But as I sat on the bed, I was suddenly startled by the sound of static emanating from the living room's television. It was an unusual noise, as we rarely used the outdated device. Irritated by it not stopping, I called out to my mother, wondering if she had turned on the television. When I received no answer, I decided to investigate and see what was happening there. As soon as I entered the room, I noticed her standing in the living area, fumbling with the buttons of the TV remote in exasperation. I couldn't resist a chuckle as I asked her, "What are you doing?" She glared at me with frustration written all over her face and replied, "This stupid thing isn't working." Evidently, she was on the verge of losing her patience and throwing the remote against the wall. "May I assist you with that?" I offered, noticing the struggle on her face as she held the remote. "Allow me to demonstrate." Taking the remote from her hand, I navigated to the TV mode and selected HDMI 1, causing the static screen to transform into a normal display. "Wipe that smirk off your face. Your father is to blame for not teaching me how to use it," she explained as I handed her the remote. Despite her scolding, I couldn't help but burst into laughter, causing her to feel embarrassed. After all the hosting and dancing at my birthday party, I was utterly exhausted, so I eagerly returned to my room to take a much-needed nap. As I lay on my bed and closed my eyes, I drifted to sleep within moments. Unfortunately, my peaceful slumber was cut short by the same annoying static noise from the living room. Despite hoping my mother would turn it off, the noise persisted and I couldn't ignore it any longer. When I got to the room, I was shocked that my mom was not there. What infuriated me even more was that she had left the TV on. Annoyed, I reached for the remote and turned it off. However, as I began to walk away, I heard the TV turn on again. My heart began to race with unease as I slowly turned around to investigate. To my surprise, the TV was still on. With trembling hands, I approached the plug and gingerly removed it, finally ending the eerie noises. After heading to my room and getting into bed, I suddenly received a jump scare by the sound of eldritch whispers from beneath my bed. My entire body began to tremble as beads of sweat formed on my forehead. The whispers persisted and grew louder, leaving me with no choice but to check the source of the unsettling noise. As my heart raced with terror, I mustered up the courage to switch on my flashlight and peered beneath the bed. To my surprise, nothing was there, which only heightened my fear. Carefully rising to my feet, I was suddenly jolted by a knock on the window, sending shivers down my spine as a chill filled the room. With trepidation, I slowly approached the window, but my heart leaped at the presence of a young girl. She appeared to be around my age, with an ashen complexion. Her long, raven-black hair hung in a tangled, disheveled mess, and she wore a dingy white dress that looked like it had not seen a wash in quite some time. As she muttered to herself incoherently, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Despite my trembling fear, I managed to stutter out a question to the mysterious girl as to why she was knocking on my window. Her response was a murmured string of words that initially eluded my understanding, until she repeated them. The bear. I was left perplexed and chilled to the bone, my mind racing to make sense of her cryptic message. The chill in the night air only intensified, causing me to shiver uncontrollably as I struggled to comprehend the situation. That was when I remembered the stuffed bear that I found on my living room table. I asked her if she was talking about the plushie, but the only words she unremitted were the bear. Without any other viable option, I made my way to the haven of my bedroom closet and cautiously unlatched it. With a sense of urgency, I rummaged through the assortment of gifts, ultimately settling on the plush bear as my offering. The bear's intricate details and exquisite craftsmanship nearly swayed me to keep it for myself, but my heart ached as I looked at the girl before me. She seemed to have come from a place of hardship and misfortune, and in that moment, I knew I had to do the right thing. Though it pained me deeply, I took a deep breath and slowly reached the window, extending the bear to her with trembling hands. She instantly grabbed the bear from my hand and flashed me a bright smile before she sauntered away, leaving me in a state of shock. I stood there transfixed as she vanished before my eyes. My heart raced in fear as I woke in a cold sweat, realizing it was a nightmare. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards my closet to check the bear, and as I swung open the closet door and rummaged through the drawer, the bear was nowhere to be seen. The knot in my stomach was followed by my throbbing heart as my eyes caught sight of a handprint on the window pane. The presence of the handprint was enough to make me lose my footing as my body involuntarily trembled with fear. I have kept this spine-chilling experience to myself for years and am hesitant to share it with anyone. My mother didn't believe me when I first confided in her, so I've kept it bottled up ever since. The haunting memory of that young girl still lingers, and I wonder who could have left the ominous bear on my coffee table. I can't shake off the feeling of unease I experienced that day, and I fear that I may never know the truth behind what happened.
What should I say about Aurora? Should I tell you how talented she is? Or should I tell you how gorgeous she is? Or maybe I should tell you how she made me want to be a better man just by being at my side. But I don't know what I should do these days to make her happy. To see that radiant smile that is so mesmerizing that I just want her to keep doing it, or to get a reaction from her. How can she be so heartless to do this to me? My love for her knows no bounds, and it breaks my heart to see her like this. I met Aurora when I was 10, and she was 7. The moment I saw her, she seemed so adorable that the urge to protect her awoke on its own. She was the daughter of my mom's client, and since her mom was also a single mother like mine, she would often bring her to my mom's salon. That day was the first time in a while that I visited my mother's workplace, but surely it wasn't the last. After that, I would always insist on going there just so I could see her, and after a few visits, the two of us ended up becoming friends. I learned that she had a pretty unique taste, such as her favorite color, even at the age, was rust, and where she disliked stuffed toys and dolls, she loved playing board games. The more I learned about her, the strong pull she had on me, and for some reason, loved wondering about her. When she told me the name of her school, I persisted that my parents transfer me there, and when they denied, I threw a fit for hours until they finally gave in. I followed her from there to the college, and one day, I was finally able to show her my heart. We dated for about 6 years till I popped the question, and we finally got married. I was over the moon when she was finally mine forever, and to ensure that she never leaves me, I tried everything I could to make her happy. Remembering the precious memories we made still makes me feel so good, and living with her didn't even make me realize when 12 years passed. It's not like I did not want a child, I do, just like any other man. I also wanted to have an offspring on my own, and wanted to see the motherly side of her. But even after trying everything we couldn't get pregnant, and her smile started to fade. It was still fine since we made peace with our fate. We couldn't continue to wait whenever our child is destined to come, and was planning on adopting a baby from an orphanage as our oldest. I liked that she was still being positive about all this. Right after making that decision, she miraculously conceived our child. I was so happy that I could fly, and judging by her reaction, she was feeling the same. So we started counting the days till the junior me or her came into this world. "What's you're watching, honey?" As I entered the room, I watched my glowing wife lying on the couch watching TV. It's a show called America's Got Talent. Now that I have started watching television, I realize I was missing out on so much. By the way, did you bring what I asked for? She said without turning to me, since there was a cute 6-year-old on the show performing a song. Ever since she got pregnant, she keeps watching and reading things that include kids. Of course, my lady, here are your blueberries. And I've also brought some pretzels, ice cream, sweet and sour candies. And for dinner, I would be cooking some steak for the 3 of us. I touched her tummy lightly as I said that, and the lovable look she gave me in return was worth it. "I love you. You're the best." She kissed me after saying that. My oh my, I was yearning for what comes after the kiss, but I was giving my all into controlling the lust I had for her because of her pregnancy. How can someone look exceptionally sexy with a baby bump? I want to devour you right now. As I said, she responded with a look of desire, but as we had promised each other not to do this until the baby is born, we avoided it. I think we should focus on watching the show, she said with a smile, completely enjoying my turned-on state. Nah, I think it would be better if I take a cold shower, I said while getting up from the couch, and she chuckled in response. By the way, you sent the invitations for the gender reveal party, right? I heard as I was about to enter the bedroom, so I told her loudly that I did. The party was held 2 days later, and all of our relatives came to attend. We were having so much fun with guessing games, friendly competitions, and receiving gifts that we didn't even realize that there was something among these laughing faces who was harboring some ill thoughts. After finally telling everyone that we were going to have a beautiful baby daughter, we received everyone's blessing. And as everyone was enjoying themselves, Aurora excused herself, saying she needed to use the restroom. And since I understood her bladder was out of control, I asked if she wanted me to stand guard like she does all the other time, but she told me to stay with guests to assist them. After about 20 minutes, I heard a loud thud along with my wife's groaning sound, so I hurried there, only to find her fallen at the end of the stairs. She tried to stand up on her own, but then I got her. She looked at the people who had gathered around her by now and tried saying, "Clah," but before she would say something, she looked down, and as I followed her gaze, I saw blood dripping between her leg. She fainted right after that, leaving me panicky. I picked her up and rushed her to my car, putting her on the seat. I carefully drove her to the emergency room. The relatives followed us to the hospital, and they all looked worried, but not more than me. I couldn't think of anything and prayed for my wife and child's safety while she was in the operating room. One of the doctors then called me and said that our child died in the womb since she fell on our baby. It was devastating. I wanted to scream and cry like hell had been loose, but I couldn't do that. I tried to regain my composure and asked if my wife was okay, and judging by the doctor's expression, she wasn't. The doctor told me that some issue had occurred in the fallopian tube, so she can never get pregnant again, and he wanted me to tell her this by myself. I was this close to breaking down, and Aurora was the only reason I was able to maintain my composure. So how was I going to do this to her? As I walked inside the room she was in, I was lying with an oxygen mask looking so weak. Her eyes met mine, and I immediately realized that she knew what was going on with her. She knew our baby had died. She didn't speak a word and just continued looking at me with a looking that was killing me from the inside. I never wanted her to go through something so painful ever in my life, and I never wanted her to have such an expression on her face. All I ever wanted was for her happiness to fill her life, not grief, not a scar like this that I can never help her heal. I didn't say anything either, and just went to sit beside her while holding her hand and rubbing it. There was nothing I could say that was going to ease the pain she was suffering, and knowing that it was the only thing I could do was crushing me inside. After a while, the relatives also rushed inside to see her condition. Nurses had already told them to stay silent since Aurora's mental condition could get worse if she hears something triggering, so they heeded their warning and stayed silent. I followed her gaze when I noticed her looking at someone with an expression that was pain, disappointment, betrayal, and so much more, to Claire, her cousin from mother's side. She said, smiling slightly, I knew I wasn't mistaken. I looked at Aurora, and this time she was looking at me, and I knew her eyes were saying, let it go. She stopped smiling, speaking, and her personality changed drastically. Watching her hurting was painful. But since I loved her, I was not going to let her suffer alone. Her grandfather came to visit her and told us that they were leaving all his assets to her name. He said he was going to do that after the party, but the unfortunate event prevented that. She didn't speak a word to him either before he left. I'm trying everything I can do to bring us out of this pain and to bring back the smile she lost that day. I have no idea how I'm going to do that and what I need to do, but I am determined to help her feel happy again. Our original plan was to adopt a child anyway, so we were going to apply for an adoption today. And if God showed us a miracle when we were about to lose all hope back then, who knows? In upcoming years, we may end up witnessing another miracle. What kind of ghost would haunt an Adam and Eve store? This is the story of the ghost that haunted the Adam and Eve store. Probably he had his reasons. I never got the full story before, but when I took over the shop, I found out that the shop was haunted. They dropped it as casual as it could be. I was going to change the place and turn it into a McDonald's, but there was this issue with the previous haunting of what used to be an Adam and Eve store. There was just something about it that was stopping the customers from ever coming in, and I knew it could later have an effect on my business when I open up. So I decided to sit with the previous owner to make sure what happened in that place. The owner told me the story. It all started in 1800s. This store served as the brothel to the town, and young girls and women were out here selling themselves for the night, so the night would bring a lot of filth to the town. Now, in this town, everyone is quite liberated when it comes to sex, but it wasn't always the case. The brothel was despised by the local woman, and they even protested to get it removed. But certain men in power did not want that to happen because of the revenue they were getting, and more than that, because of the leverage that the ladies in brothel had over those sleazy men. The mayor of town Barrington wanted no part in the demolition of the brothel, and himself had a lot of times tried to save the brothel by providing it necessary funds from the bank. Some said that it was as a matter of fact run by the mayor himself, but they were all accusations. The mayor claimed when in question, he said in the town meeting, "The brothel brings in visitors to the town. That brings in new customers to the businesses. If you are ready to say goodbye to that, then I can propose the demolition of the brothel." And everyone in the town hall was quiet, and that was the end of the discussion for closing of brothel. There were churchgoers and God people who did not want any part in the town that would involve themselves in such sinful trade, and they decided to protest at the mayor's office and stood outside demanding mayor to close the brothel. But the mayor wasn't ready to do that, so in return, he decided to talk to one of the pastors in the church who took confessions and called him in for a meeting, and they sat down. And the mayor started without stopping, told him everything and every reason why he can't destroy the brothel. He said, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned a lot. You see, Father, I have done something. The devil have a power over me. Around 2 years ago, when I had the bad fight with my wife, I came to the town and I saw a girl, Myuu. She was pretty. She was 17 at the time, and I was just smitten by the way she looked. She was like a sunshine that she calmed my anger. I decided to bet her father, and that night, that is what I did. I bed Myuu, and come morning, I realized what I had done, and I wanted nothing but to change what had happened. But in that guilt, there was the pleasure, and pleasure was winning. I was cheating on my wife with Myuu, but I still loved my wife. And then one day, Myuu tells me that I put a baby in her belly, and that just made me nervous. It was around the time when everyone wanted the brothel to shut down. In rage, I slapped Myuu, and she fell and hit her head on the corner of the bed, and I had no intention to do so, but that killed her. Now I wanted to come clean, but the ladies in the brothel said that they won't breathe a word to anyone if I let the brothel kept open. So they have the power over me, Father. I cannot let the brothel go away." And then the father slowly smiled and put his firm hand on the shoulders of Barrington and said, "Burn your sins, son, all of them. Once they are burnt, no accusations will be laid upon you." And then the very next day, the news broke out in the town. The brothel was lit on fire, and everyone inside of it died. No woman, no customer survived the fire, and everyone died. And then as the years passed, the property was passed from owners to owners, and everybody complained about the place being out of ordinary and disturbing. They even said that they witnessed a stray young girl walking around the halls. It wasn't until we opened an Adam and Eve store here that we saw it for the first time. Sex was symbolic to this store, and so the opening of our store called the apparitions to break loose and wreak havoc. That is why it is just third month and we have to close the shop. Hope McDonald's will bring in something better. They finished their story, and I realized that this place is not the right place for business, and I didn't even stay a week, and thank God I didn't. I would have lost more in that place. Now it is just an abandoned building. No Adam and Eve store, no McDonald's. Just an abandoned building for the ghosts to roam freely. There was once this story about Pinocchio that a man wrote. It was one of the grittiest and most sadistic things that I have ever read. The story was definitely not the child-friendly Disney version of the Pinocchio, but it was rather a sadistic version of it. And then some often argue even that the sadistic story that I have heard is the real story and not the Disney one. Even though the Disney story is more hopeful and cheerful, there's definitely something about the sadistic story that is much more real, and the chances of it being closer to reality trumps over the chances of the Disney one being real. The story starts with a man who brought in a doll from a county fair and kept it in the basement of his house. It was said the man that bought the doll wasn't really stable when it came to everyday social situations. He was bit slowly when it came to things, and he was labeled a creep in the town. Kids of the town didn't really help by bullying him constantly, and because of that, the condition that he was in was even worse than it was before, and it made him more secluded from everyone else. It all spiraled to when the man was pushing into becoming a loner, and that is when he started this friendship with the dolls and started talking to them, and his parents did see that, and even tried to get him out talking and meeting people in real life, but he tried that before, and people were not ready to accept him out in the society, and then he became a complete shut-in. It was then that his conversations started out with the dolls that he was collecting. He would start talking to them in front of the people, but every other time he did talk to them. He must have been the college age when he started keeping those dolls, and it soon became something he did very often and became the collector of the creepy dolls. It wasn't until the late summer when things changed for him. It was the mid-1800s, and the time was much harder than it was today. So some people, while he was walking out with his dolls in his hands, he was crossing the river stream passing by, when some of the guys in his town saw him, and they decided to gang up on him and bully him. He wasn't sure what he did wrong, and there was nothing that he could even do to stop that feeling. So he just crawled himself into a hamster ball and got beaten by those guys from the town. He stayed there motionless as long as he could. He just wanted the guys to go away. And when they realized that he isn't really reacting to anything, they just left away, kicking his dolls. And as they did, a man in a suit picked up the doll and looked at it and asked him as he was lying down, "Now, young man, is this your friend?" And as the man looked up as he heard the word friend, he realized that the man was not a danger. And then he looked and just slightly nodded. The man in the suit said, "Well, young man, I'm going to pay you $1,000 for this doll and teach you how to make them if you wish so." The man had no idea about anything, and he just said yes and followed him. The man showed him around the factory, and that is where he learned how to make really amazing dolls, and he was especially interested in the ceramic dolls, and most importantly, was able to find a career out of this, and went on to manufacture dolls and became an integral part of the manufacturing company. And then one day, when he had enough money, he left the company, thanked the man for his help, and decided to open up a small workshop of his own in his basement, or even buy a warehouse. He later went on to establish a workshop of ceramic doll manufacturing in his basement, and then bought a warehouse, and that is how he started his own company of dolls. It had been 10 years since he had started this, and he even had the support of the man who gave him the job when he was found down beaten by the bullies. But even after becoming so successful and rich, it wasn't enough for the people to shut up, and they went on to bully him even then. And even after the success, the people of the town looked down at him, as he was the same old man who talked to the dolls in his basement. And the man this time seemed to take it quite well. He said nothing and did nothing about it, and just focused on his work. One day, while he was coming back from his workshop, one of the bullies who bullied him years ago was strolling around with his kid, and he decided to bully him again to impress his child. He took the doll from his hands, and the bully father told his son, "Be anything you like, but don't be this creep, all right, son?" And he snatched the doll from the hand of the man, and then stomped on it, breaking it, and then went on to beat the man. This time, the man was angry, and it was almost as if that he was done by all that bullying he had been going through, and he decided to do something so vigorous that it would make his bullies regret that they ever laid a hand on him. He was a man of money now and success, so getting things wasn't really something very difficult. So he did what he knew the best. He threw some money around and acquired the family information on all his bullies. And then, when he was done with it, he hired 3 muscles, really strong big guy that could not be challenged by any of his bullies, and then ordered them to kidnap the kids of every single bully that rattled him when he was a kid. They brought the kids to the warehouse, and then the man went on to carefully turn every kid into a ceramic doll, and he did carefully where the kids won't suffocate, but couldn't even do anything. He then wrote a letter to every single one of his bullies that he has made them dolls, and they surely must want. They came and they tried threatening the man, but he was now with the big muscles. Then he said to them, "You have been bullying me for my dolls, and now I am going to bully you for your dolls. Your kids have been carefully turned into dolls. If you want your dolls to be alive again, bring the deed to everything you own and name it to me." At first they didn't believe him, but then he brought out one of the dolls and then hammered it, and the king came out of it and started running to his father. And the man said, "Well, William wasn't too much of a bully, and to be honest, he is too poor. I cannot really get anything from him, so I am letting his kid go, just to set an example. So hurry up, guys. Bring in your deeds." They all were very helpless in that moment and went and brought in the deeds for their house, farm, cattle, or anything they owned. And the man was quite joyous to see that, and he took all the deeds and set them on fire, and then brought out the dolls and ordered the muscles to break them all carefully and said, "There you go. Make your dolls real." Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
As I was mindlessly scrolling through the internet a couple of days ago, a particular image caught my attention. A doll clad in a bright pink hoodie. Initially, the picture appeared innocuous, but I became increasingly uneasy as I read the accompanying caption and scrutinized the doll's features. My curiosity piqued, and I delved deeper into the matter, only to uncover a sinister truth that surpassed all my worst fears. The photo I saw turned out to be the work of Anatoly Moskovin, a former linguist, philologist, and historian, a man who was born on September 1st, 1966, in Nizhny Novgorod, Russia. When Anatoly was a child, he often took strolls through cemeteries with his friends, particularly the Krasnaya Ethna Cemetery, which wasn't very far from where he lived. They collected bottles, lit fire, and had fun among themselves. One day, during one of his leisurely walks through the cemetery, he stumbled upon a somber funeral procession. The mourners were bidding farewell to an 11-year-old girl who had departed too soon. Standing quietly, he observed as the mourners paid their last respects by tenderly kissing the girl's forehead. To his surprise, he was suddenly yanked forward and compelled to do the same. Though the experience was unsettling, he couldn't help but find the ceremony deeply intriguing. His curiosity grew more robust as time passed, and he found himself inexplicably drawn to cemeteries like an unbreakable magnet. It all began in the 7th grade, when he wandered amongst the graves and tombstones. Over time, his love for the subject only deepened. By the time 2000 rolled around, he had conducted an extensive study of not just the city's cemeteries, but many others in the surrounding regions. Besides his deep interest in graveyards, death, and burial rituals, he was also involved in some occult studies. In an interview, he described how he went to the sites to study the graves in the summer evening when there was nothing but silence. There were no watchmen, no homeless people, and no police either. Only dogs running around. Upon concluding his studies at the Philological Faculty of Moscow State University, he gained recognition in academic communities for his profound interest in Celtic history, folklore, and linguistics. He was renowned for his exceptional intellect, having taught himself an impressive 13 languages before reaching his early 30s. His linguistic prowess was widely admired, and he was regarded as a true genius and an eccentric by his fellow academics because of his weird fascination and collection of life-size dolls. In 2005, a local publisher named Oleg Ryoboy aimed to compile a comprehensive catalog of over 700 cemeteries located around Nizhny Novgorod. He was referred to Anatoly for the work, who was ready to pour himself into such a task. Anatoly embarked on a journey to visit all 752 graveyards scattered across the region. He meticulously studied the graves, processed field materials, and documented everything he saw. Despite facing significant challenges, such as the inaccessibility of motor vehicles to certain areas, he persevered and walked an average of 30 kilometers daily to reach his destination. As time passed, his peculiar work hours and frequent visits to various cemeteries coincided with a series of unsettling incidents of grave robbery. The police began to suspect him as the perpetrator, but despite their investigations, they could not find any substantial evidence to incriminate him. Even those who knew him testified that, while he may have been odd, he was a consummate professional and would never engage in such a heinous act. Nevertheless, he remained a suspect on the police's list of potential culprits. When the cases of stolen children's corpses increasingly grew and every other suspect was rolled out during the investigation, he became the prime suspect. Police then searched his apartment and garage, and 26 reported bodies were discovered. Police found instructions for making the dolls, maps of cemeteries in the region, and a collection of photographs and videos depicting open graves and disinterred bodies. He had embalmed and decorated the dead bodies into what he called the dolls. To do that, he had desecrated over 150 graves, and no one knew he was doing such a thing. After getting arrested, Anatoly started to cooperate with authorities. He expressed great sympathy for the children who lost their lives and believed they could be brought back to life through science or black magic. As an expert on Celtic culture, he had learned that the ancient druids would sleep on graves to communicate with the spirits of their dead. So he did some research and started sleeping on children's graves to determine if their spirits wanted to be brought back to life. He claimed to have been doing this for 20 years and insisted that when he began, he would only dig up the graves after getting permission from the child within. His idea of permission was asking the dead about it, and if he did not hear a denial, he would proceed with the grave digging. As he grew older, it became physically painful for him to sleep on the graves, so he began bringing the bodies to his home, believing that it would be more comfortable sleeping near them, hoping for the spirits to speak to him in a more relaxed environment. He used mummification techniques on the corpses to preserve them using a combination of salt and baking soda, and once the bodies were dried, he would carry them to his apartment. He then started experimenting on how to bring them back to life and give them more functional bodies. But he started stuffing them with rags and paddings when he could not prevent them from shrinking. He would sometimes use wax masks decorated with nail polish over the faces and dress them in brightly colored clothes and wigs. Whatever he did with the bodies made them appear as large homemade dolls, which was why no one suspected him. He said he knew what he was doing was illegal, but he did it because he felt the children were calling out to be rescued. And Natalie denied doing anything else to the bodies and said that he thought of those dolls as his children as he revealed his desire to have a daughter. He used to speak to the corpses, sing songs to them, and often watch cartoons with them and even hold birthday parties for them. He was later charged with 5 years in prison for desecrating graves and dead bodies. After that, it was evaluated that he had paranoid schizophrenia and was deemed unfit to stand trials. Natalie was then moved to a psychiatric clinic, and in September 2018, his doctor stated that he was better and petitioned the court to release him. Another psychiatric evaluation in February 2019 found it too early, and the hospital withdrew their petition.
A friend and I planned a trip to Hawaii, but since the two idiots lived in different states and our work hours differed, we decided to meet directly at our destination. I'm not that big a fan of solo flying, but if I wanted to see those numbskulls, I needed to do this since it's rare for us to meet like this. The time for my flight that was to depart was from San Diego was 9:35 p.m. and it was to land to my destination around 3 in the morning. So I finished my work in a jiffy and headed out a bit earlier than usual. Right after I got out of the office at around 6 p.m., I headed straight to my apartment, grabbed my already packed bag, and called myself a cab. I was up all night packing my stuff and couldn't get enough sleep, so I was feeling a bit tired. Still, I got to the airport on time and went ahead for the formalities. The flight had been a bit delayed, so I was told to wait around till the announcement. I went ahead and took a seat, putting my earpods on, and I started watching Young Sheldon. I had watched Big Bang Theory and had been meaning to watch this for quite a while, but as I was always too busy with work, I couldn't get the time to do that. As I was watching the show, I looked up to see how long it would take for them to make the announcement, and that was when I noticed a man walking in my direction. It felt like he was staring right at me as he walked. Could have been my imagination, but I swear that I saw a slight smile on his face for a brief moment. The man walked closer and sat next to me. I thought, what the hell? There are so many empty seats, so why is he so close to me? I acted as if I wasn't fazed by this, and whilst pretending to be on a phone call, I got up and moved toward a different seat. After a while, the man also got up and again sat next to me. I was speechless. Well, more pissed to be honest. Was he trying to follow me or something? I didn't know if I was imagining things due to sleep deprivation, but it still felt a bit awkward, so I tried my best to avoid him. While I was focused on the phone, I could feel his gaze on me. It was like he was trying to watch inside my soul or something. There was no way I was going to let this slide. So I lifted my eyes from the phone and looked over at him. He flinched for a second, but then gave me the same weird, disgusting smile I saw earlier on his face. There had been a few times when I had to face such weird men in my life, and it was equally unpleasant and creepy each time. But in my opinion, every girl might have to some point. Even though I was feeling a little stuffy inside my chest and was slightly scared, I knew there were people around who would back me up if he tried to pull something, so I called him out. "Excuse me, sir, can you move a bit further for me?" The moment I said that, his expression changed. He furrowed his eyebrows and angrily stared at me. "I don't believe you own these seats, so I don't have to do as you say, and nor am I going to." What the hell? This man was creepier than I thought, so I decided not to pay him any attention, and I got up. Very well then. I walked away to stand in the corner instead of sitting anywhere, and as I was walking away, I couldn't help but notice him getting exacerbated by me. Just when I thought he would take the hint that I was getting annoyed by him, he shamelessly got up and stood next to where I was standing. And trust me, at this point he was ruffling my feathers to the point where I was about to shout at him. But still, to be honest, I was feeling a little terrified as well. I mean, who wouldn't when some creepy strange man keeps following you? There was security and I could report this person, but it would only make a mess of things and I might end up missing my flight. But before I could warn him of his actions, I heard the boarding announcement, so I decided to let it be. He wouldn't possibly follow me inside the plane, right? But as I walked toward the gate that led to my flight, I noticed him following me with a hysterical smirk on his face. Now here I can tell that my blood had started to run cold, thinking if he had the same destination as me, and if we were on the same flight, he could try to do something to me after landing. What would I do then? I was panicked and confused, unable to understand what to do. But as I crossed the gate, I couldn't help but turn to see if he was still behind me. He wasn't. Instead, I saw him giving a big creepy smile while standing right outside the gate while waving at me. It still gave me a weird chill down my spine, but I took a sigh of relief while thanking God that he stopped. Guess he had a different destination from me. Still, the thought that he could have been on the same flight puts the wind up. It's not like I'm implying that he had ill intentions toward me, but one could never know what malice others harbor and to what extent they are willing to go just to harm others. Thankfully, I reached Hawaii on time and met my two friends there. While I was with them enjoying myself, I forgot all about that little encounter of mine. That week was fun as we tried out multiple things together, ate different food, went to a few interesting tourist spots, and took some memorable pictures of us together. The time went by flying, and I was once again back to my same old work routine. Tonight after dinner, as I went to watch some news on the television and started turning channels, as I was doing this, I paused as one local news station was broadcasting about a group of men who were targeting women at the airport and kidnapping them. These people were involved in a large-scale sex trafficking business, and their targets were single women and gullible women at the airports. They would often work at night when these poor souls were either arriving somewhere or were about to fly off. After somehow getting their attention, the culprits would talk to them like any normal person, and when the chance arrived, they would somehow make those women pass out. Then, pretending to be their friend or family member, those monsters would take them outside and disappear with the victims. Luckily, a female FBI officer went undercover and brought this to life while risking her neck to make the mission a success. There were around 15 women and 7 men rescued after the mission, and they were all in bad shape. After getting the treatment and giving their alibi, they were sent home safely. As the news ended, I turned the TV off and leaned back on the couch. That's how I was reminded of the man at the airport. I was lucky that I was being cranky that day, or else I would have been among one of those victims. That's why one should always be aware of their surroundings and the people who approach them, because you never know what hidden motives they have that might lead you to a life-threatening situation.
During my time in college, I had a friend whose dad owned an 800-acre piece of land in eastern Texas. In the past, he leased it out to hunters and paper companies, but was no longer doing it. He had built a cabin on the land a few years before and would let us go out there from time to time to mess around. It served as a great way to relax from the pressures of school and getting closer to nature. The spring break of 1997, we loaded up our trucks and headed for the cabin. Our plans included shooting guns, drinking beer, and other things rednecks like us do in the woods. Our first morning kept us pretty busy cleaning the cabin and moving all our stuff inside. Around dinner, we made a big fire outside and cooked a bunch of steaks and fried potatoes. We skipped dessert and broke open some beers. The sun went down not long after, and for the remainder of the evening, we got loaded and passed around a joint or two. At some point in the night, I heard a shuffling noise outside and went out to check on it. The fire was barely burning at that point, and just outside of its light, I swore I could see the shape of a man standing completely still. From what I could tell, he was facing me, perhaps waiting to see what I would do. I blinked my eyes real hard to get a clearer look, but my position and the lack of light made it hard to see clearly. The shape continued to stand still, so I decided I'd walk up a little closer in hopes of getting a better picture. The thought terrified me, but I was transfixed by the being, or perhaps I was still too intoxicated to make wise decisions. I took 2 steps forward, but was distracted by a voice behind me. My friend had woken up and noticed the door was wide open. So he got out of bed and saw me walking around the fire. His voice caused me to jump a little, but I soon realized who it was speaking. I asked him if he saw the figure on the other side of the fire pit. He just laughed at me and said I must be so stoned I was seeing things. We laughed it off and returned to bed. On my way, I turned back to take one more look, but the shape was no longer there. I chuckled to myself and went back to sleep. The next morning, I wrote the whole experience off as the result of too much fun and went on with my day. We spent the first half of it fishing at the big pond. Post-lunch was shooting guns and one guy's compound bow that he had just bought. The beers and smoke were broken out after dinner. A game of poker was attempted but soon canceled in favor of another evening telling lies around the fire. On one of my many trips to relieve myself that night, I was spooked by the sound of a stick breaking close by and noped it back to the fire. The look of fear on my face made the other guys laugh their butts off. I tried to explain what had happened, but was quickly reminded that we weren't the only creatures in the woods. The reasoning seemed sound, so I accepted it. Not long after, we were standing around, involved in some deep discussion, and I turned to speak to the guy on my left. What I saw caused me to clench up so tight I could have snapped a steel rod with my sphincter. Standing within a few steps behind my friend was another man I did not recognize. It was like he appeared out of nowhere. What made it creepier was that he was staring intently at the back of his head, almost like he was trying to bore through it with his eyes. I remained frozen stiff. The longer I looked at him, I realized he was the same being I saw lingering outside the light of the fire the night before. He was average height with a long, unkempt beard. My friend continued rambling about whatever, unaware of his shadow. After several long seconds, the stranger turned to me with a blank expression and walked away. This was when my friend finally noticed my horrified look. When he spoke, the thrall of fear was released, and I began pointing and rambling about what I had just witnessed. He and my other friend laughed at me again. There was no way I was seeing things this time. I described the man, and one of them suggested he was a Bigfoot. Despite my protestations, no one was buying it, and I eventually cut my losses and shut up. However, I wasn't beat. Their mockery had made me even more determined to prove the stranger's existence. The next 2 days were quiet. No stranger, in other words, but I kept my eyes peeled for anything out of the ordinary. By our 5th morning, I was beginning to question my sanity. I'd seen this mysterious being stalking around us twice, and now it had suddenly disappeared. I resolved to put my quest on the back burner until some new evidence arose. My friend's dad had mentioned him, an owner of one of the surrounding properties, had spotted a small group of wild hogs running through his land, so we grabbed our rifles and went on the search for them. A mile or so down one of the property's many roads, we came across some hog wallows and knew we were on the scent. We went up the road, now on foot tracking them. Another mile on, we stumbled upon 3 large hogs rooting up the ground and prepared to make bacon. 2 of us chambered around as quiet as possible on our rifles and took aim. I was less than a second from saying 3 and pulling the trigger when the loud crack of another rifle filled the air, followed closely by a burst of wood and bark above my friend's head. It took a moment for it to register that we were being shot at. A few seconds later, another crack and strike, this time even closer to my friend. We weren't going to wait for a third. The friend who appeared to be the target led us down a side trail that led back to the cabin. No more shots followed as we fled. However, instead of finding safety at the camp, the shots began again. Seeing no other option, we hopped into my truck and hauled it out of there. This was a time just before the commonality of cell phones, so we had to drive the 20 miles to town to get help. After we explained the situation, we returned to the property a few hours later with some deputies. We approached slowly and remained in the cars when we parked. We waited to see if the shots would start again, but nothing happened. A cursory look around counted 3 holes in the cabin and another 2 in my buddy's windshield. Perhaps the worst was that all of our camping stuff, sleeping bags and such, were spread out all over the ground. Luckily, we'd smoked everything the night before, so the police were none the wiser. Nothing was missing but a box of .30-30 ammo and, strangely, my sleeping bag and wool blanket. A theory began to form in the deputy's mind that we had stumbled upon a squatter or poacher camping out on the property for whatever reason. They acted as if they were going to let it go, but once my friend's dad, who owned the land, heard about it, he put pressure on them to start a search. This was about the time I repeated my story of seeing someone lurking around the cabin. No one was laughing now, and my story was finally being taken seriously by somebody. The search was led around the property by my friend's dad. School had already begun again by the time it took place. It continued for a full week, but nothing other than a few old camps were found. It was assumed that he knew the heat would be on him after the shooting incident, and he moved on. During the course of the investigation, several avenues were followed to ID the stranger like escaped cons, but he remains unidentified to this day. Because of the chance of another attack, our trips to the property ended. The next year we tried to camp out somewhere else, but it wasn't the same and our nature getaways died out. Within 5 years, my friend's dad had a heart attack and lost interest in the cabin. The paper company's lease were renewed and the land's trees have been used to make paper and pulpwood products ever since. Each time I jot down a quick note, I'm reminded of our awesome trips and especially the odd and terrifying week that caused them to stop. I do, once or twice a year, talk to my old college friends on the phone. As far as he's heard, that crazy stranger still hasn't been caught. We sometimes theorize as to his origins and where he may have ended up. I, however, often take this much further when I'm alone. I wonder why our so-called strangers seem to focus so much of his anger onto my friend, and perhaps, far more concerning, is he still out there waiting for his chance to finish what he began all those years ago?
2 summers ago, I downloaded the dating app Hinge. I'd heard from friends that it was one of the better platforms for LGBT folks to find dates, so being a lesbian, I decided to give it a go. I found it to be just as good as my friends had mentioned, as the little prompts really give you an idea of what people are like before you actually connect with them. I hate to sound like this horror story is sponsored by Hinge and Raid Shadow Legends or something, but it really was refreshing to find a dating app that seemed to focus much more on personality than just a person's looks. Anyway, I'm just flicking through profiles, sending out the odd message here and there when I come across the profile of a girl called Amy. Amy was hotter than hot. She was literally my type too. Cropped dyed hair, sleeve tattoos, but a painfully adorable little face with these big, shining green eyes. On top of that, her job title said motorcycle mechanic, and there were legit photos of her working on old Harleys and whatnot, which, again, I thought was like the hottest thing ever. I double-tapped the picture of her working on the bike, typed in a message like, "This is so cool," and then just hoped and prayed that she'd be back in touch. It couldn't have been 20 minutes that passed before I got a little alert saying that Amy has invited you to start the conversation, or something like that. I'm thinking, no way. Is this a real profile? Sometimes a girl might take literally weeks to match with you, and here was Amy, hitting me up after less than an hour. I had my doubts, put it that way, but doubts that were quickly put to bed when she turned out to be charming, witty, and highly intelligent. We didn't always see eye to eye on certain issues, but the fact that she seemed reasonable and open to compromise was like the polar opposite of a red flag. It was like a blue flag or something. Something that screamed potentially wifey material over here. And as much as I tried not to hype the whole thing up, I was super excited to meet her to see if we had as much chemistry in person. So we arranged a meeting at a local coffee shop, nice and public for a first-time meeting. We're talking on Telegram by this point too, so she was able to send me a picture of the outfit she planned on wearing, just so I could recognize her. And oh my god, she looked gorgeous. I didn't think I could get any more nervous than I already was, but when I saw her in that flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled so her tats were showing, I swear I felt my blood pressure ramp up by 5 notches. Anyway, I take a few deep breaths, psych myself up to meet her, then head out of my apartment and around to the coffee place. Anyone who's been on a first date for the first time in a while will tell you how nerve-wracking it can be. Standing there, or sitting there, trying to look cool, while simultaneously being nervous as you're rubbernecking for any sign of your date. So, that's the kind of mood I'm in as I'm standing outside the coffee place, stewing in my own anxiety for 10 minutes, then 15, then 20. By the time I'd been waiting for a half hour, I was starting to get a little worried. Amy had mentioned that traffic was awful, so I figured she might be a few minutes late. But a whole half hour late? I was starting to think I was being stood up. I shoot Amy a text asking how far away she was. It takes a few minutes for her to see the message, but unlike her usual replies, which took a matter of minutes to type out, she doesn't send me anything. I figured that might be because she's driving, so I decide to give her a call just in case it's more convenient for her to talk that way. But again, there's no answer. I'm trying my best not to panic, telling myself like, it's fine, she's just busy, don't freak out. But I think deep down I knew it was all too good to be true. We'd matched too fast, she'd been too nice. I mean, she was objectively way out of my league, but it didn't make what came next any easier to deal with. I'm practically staring at our message thread on my phone, praying she'll either call or I get that little Amy is typing thing so I can at least know that she's still there. Then thank God, I see that little typing notification, and I feel this pure wave of relief wash over me, expecting her message to say something along the lines of, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry I'm late." But it didn't say that. It said something entirely different. And although I can't remember exactly what the message said, as I didn't exactly keep it around my inbox for long, it said something like this. Okay, I think this has gone on long enough, and I have to come clean. I'm not a lesbian. I'm not even a girl. Sorry to catfish you. I just thought you were hot and wanted to check you out in person. In person? What did they mean by in person? What followed was the most horrifying moment of revelation that I've ever experienced. Not only was Amy not real, or at least not the person I thought I was talking to, but the psycho creeper who got off on inconveniencing lesbians was actually there, somewhere not too far away, watching me. It made my skin crawl. I was angry, upset, confused, but the feeling that seemed to override all others was fear. The pure terror of being seen by someone or something that you can't see in turn. I start spinning around trying to find the creep staring at me, but no one seemed to be watching, or if they were certainly doing a great job of hiding it. Then, and I'm not even sure what compelled me to do this, but I started looking up. Now, the coffee place I was standing outside was surrounded by tall buildings, possibly the reason my instincts were screaming like, up, up, up. I must have looked like I was losing my mind out there, spinning like a top with this terrified look on my face, but suddenly, I saw him. Standing about 5 stories up in a large open window was the figure of a man. He was so high up that I couldn't quite make out his face, but he was definitely holding something in his hand, and I'd be willing to bet my left arm that it was a freaking cell phone. I'm guessing most of the units were apartments, and they all had those large glass windows, but he was the only person I could see up there. It sure did look like he was staring down at me, but I mean, I didn't know for sure that he was staring at me. And then just when I figured I might just be imagining things and that there was no one actually watching me, just the sick troll that had tricked me into a fake date, he waved. The guy raised his hand and gives this slow, theatrical wave to make it perfectly clear that he was watching me. I swear to God I nearly puked right there and then. I was this horrible combination of nauseous and numb, and I've never felt like I was about to pass out in my entire life, but I feel like I came close right then. My head was just spinning with this this can't be happening. How could it be so dumb? No one that hot would ever like me. Of course it's a catfish. You're so stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. All I could do was just walk away with legs like jelly, wondering if I was going to scream or cry first. I've never felt so violated before, not without an actual crime being committed. I had zero recourse other than to report the catfish account, and no matter how upset I was, it wasn't like I could get the cops to arrest anyone over it. So yeah, I walked back to my apartment in a kind of daze, fell onto my mattress and just ugly cried into a pillow for like a half hour straight. It was seriously one of the worst days of my entire life, and it put me off dating apps for almost 2 whole years. Even now, I have to apologize when talking to girls because I know I sound overly paranoid asking for video dates or whatever. I guess I'm lucky. And I can kind of blame COVID, but honestly, I don't care how paranoid or overly cautious I might seem. After what I went through, I can assure you, you can never be too careful when it comes to meeting internet strangers.
I met a guy online back in August of last year. We immediately hit it off. I was reluctant to get into a relationship though, as I had been cheated on a few months prior and lied to the entire relationship. Catching feelings for anyone again scared the life out of me. But this guy was so sweet and nice that I trusted him and was willing to risk it for him. Skip to mid-September. We both admitted feelings for each other, and a while before this, but he was reluctant to ask me out. I wasn't sure why, but I figured he was just waiting for the right moment, which he was, because he slipped that his birthday was coming up, and I pointed out how come he's turning 19 and still in high school. Then he said that he isn't 19, he's 17, and he's turning 18 in a few days. This made me mad though. We've never actually been intimate. I'm 18, and I don't like being lied to. We both met in a place that's only for 18 plus people. He pointed out that I never directly asked him his age. I just assumed because of where we met. Despite this, when he turned 18 and asked me out, I said yes. We lasted less than a month. He would start fights every single day over the dumbest stuff. If I took over 10 minutes to reply, he would get mad at me and told me I needed to tell him when I was going to do stuff. So he wasn't waiting for my message. He got mad, and I had been in relationships before him, despite none of them turning out good. So I broke up with him. I thought maybe in the future things would stop, because this is his first relationship and he was just unexperienced. I told him multiple times calmly that things need to change, and once the fight stopped, we can try again. But they never stopped for more than a few days. One time he lied to me, saying some girl had been flirting with him and asking if he was single or taken, just so I confirm a relationship, which I didn't because we weren't dating anymore, and he got mad. I pointed out it was obviously a lie, but he insisted happened. Only later that evening did he admit that it was a lie. Eventually, I shut off my Snapchat map because I didn't want him knowing where specifically I lived, and he got mad that I didn't trust him. One of my best IRL friends messaged me asking why he was requesting to follow her. I checked his Instagram, and he had started following everyone who was following me. I told him to unfollow them because he doesn't even know any of them, and it's kind of weird. He got mad, but he did unfollow them. 2 weeks ago, I woke up one morning and he told me we need to talk. He asked me why I've been lying to him, why I've been hiding things behind his back. I asked him what he was talking about because I never lied to him nor hid anything from him. He said he has been messaging all of my friends on Instagram asking for information about me, who I've dated, who I've been doing, etc. He asked me why I've been FaceTiming people behind his back, not telling him everything about my past relationships, etc. How to know if I was more shocked to the fact that he did this, or than the fact that those people were actually giving him information about me. I never did anything behind his back though. And the only person I ever FaceTimed me first randomly and for 30 minutes just to play 8-ball and iMessage. He even mentioned talking to people who I haven't talked to in months. He also made alternate accounts, befriending people from my past, voice chatting with them, playing games with them, all just to get info from them about me once they opened up. He even mentioned that my ex had messaged me, which I never told anyone, so I had no idea how he found that out. My Snapchat kept logging me out, so I think he hacked into my Snapchat to read my conversations with people. He found my old Reddit and went back 2 years of common history to get mad at stuff I've said in the past. When I asked him how he found out about my one ex contacting me, he said, "You don't deserve to know," before proceeding to block me on everything. The day after, he emailed me saying that there's nothing left to say, we're just acquaintances now, etc., etc. I told him now, and we aren't even acquaintances anymore. He's just some crazy dude I dated, and it's his loss in the end, because he caused this by doing detective work, as he liked to put it. He said he did all this, and he was curious, not that he didn't trust me, and he found lots of stuff he didn't want to. I guess about my past relationships, because that's all he ever mentioned. His little tangent went on for quite a while saying he's my loss and he could have made me happy and blah blah. I told him he never could have made me happy. His money, which wasn't much, maybe, but not him. As a person, not since the first fight started. No one knew where it came from. We all went to sleep the night before, and it was there the next morning. Not even the owners of the house on both sides had a clue how it got there. Neither homeowner ever heard as much as the hiss of air brakes. During the whole of that night, the only real indication of how it arrived was the trailer was sitting upon. I was still relatively young at the time, around 13, but the subject was a hot topic around the neighborhood, and every person I spoke to, whether a kid or an adult, was eager to talk about it. Our neighborhood was somewhere new and off by itself, and it wasn't out of the ordinary for folks to dump things out there. Dogs and cats were the most common, but 1 or 2 cars would turn up every year. A house, though, no one ever seen that or expected it. The days passed, but no information could be gotten from anywhere. Soon, it began to take on a spooky and haunted reputation. Along with its phantom like a rival in the dark of the night, it did look a little familiar to that house from Psycho. The stories first reached me while I was talking to a friend's younger brother. Among the grade school kids, the house was becoming a very real symbol of fear, although it was just an old empty house to me. This fear didn't prevent some of the more adventurous of them just entering and exploring it. I witnessed a particularly funny episode just by chance. While loafing aimlessly around the streets, I was passing by in time to see a preteen boy running from the house in terror, claiming that something had grabbed him. Whether his imagination had gotten the best of him, or an older kid was having a bit of fun, the horror put upon this abandoned house had fully taken root in the neighborhood. While this was going on, a real boogeyman had been forgotten about. I'll not put his actual name here, not because of privacy, but that of the victims. We'll call him Rudy. Rudy had grown up in the neighborhood, and until he was arrested, was well liked by a lot of the parents, had voiced their fears early on because of his habit of hanging around younger boys. When he was released from jail, he was allowed to move in with his folks. Anyone who wasn't aware of his proclivities beforehand knew now every parent in the neighborhood watched him closely. But when the ghost house popped up, people's focus is shifted. A few of us teenagers were riding our bikes around the neighborhood. The father of a boy we'll call Bill was looking for a son. I overheard him speaking to a young kid close by, asking if he had seen him. Nonchalantly, the boy said that he had seen Bill going into that ghost house with Rudy just a few minutes prior. And this got my full attention. The shock of the father's face is still crystal clear in my mind. I turned around and watched the father run full speed into the house. Most of us there stood transfixed as we saw Bill's dad disappear inside. Things were quiet for about the first 30 seconds. Then, all of a sudden, a loud ruckus broke out, followed by Rudy flying out of the doorway and onto the ground below. Billy's dad was close behind. He leapt onto Rudy, throwing fists as he landed. Bill came out a few seconds later crying for his dad to stop. His dad ignored him, standing up and kicking Rudy to the ground over and over. Rudy eventually got to his feet and ran for home. Billy and his dad were right behind him. I continued to watch until they disappeared from my sight. Billy and Rudy would both claim later on that nothing had happened between them. Either way, Billy's dad had the support of most of the community, and Rudy declined to press charges on him. Rudy would eventually move away and out of the minds of most of us, until he was arrested 3 years later for abducting and killing 2 boys near his new home. Only then did we realize how lucky Bill had been. That night, as I'd fallen asleep, I remember wondering what was going to happen to Rudy and Bill's dad. When I woke up, things were normal for a summer morning. Around 9, I was making a bowl of cereal when I got a phone call. It was a friend of mine, and he was short of breath and excited. The ghost house. It's gone, man. I hung up and hopped on my bike. When I arrived at the end of the streets, I looked down and saw the empty lot as it used to be. I rode down to it, and a small group were gathering talking to the neighbors. It was much the same as the morning when it appeared. They hadn't heard or seen anything strange. It seemed to leave just as silently as it had arrived. To this day, I haven't met a soul who knows anything about that house. Sometimes I think I dreamt the whole thing up. But then I speak to an old friend from the neighborhood, and my memories are confirmed. Of course, I don't believe it was haunted or anything like that, but I know for sure that something was wrong about it. And I pray that I never see it again.
Growing up, my fraternal twin brother and I shared a room. I think both of us would have preferred to have our own room, but our dad used our extra room for a study. He was a lawyer and needed it as his office at home, I suppose. Anyhow, I slept on the top bunk, and my brother slept on the bottom bunk. The worst thing about sleeping on the top bunk is that I tend to have to get up several times a night to go to the bathroom. I guess I must have a small bladder or something. I also drink a lot of pop, which probably has a lot more to do with it. Or it might have had something to do with the fact that my brother tosses and turns all night, and it wakes me up over and over again. One night when I was 15, when I went to bed, I noticed that my brother had already gone to bed. I had originally intended to stay up and read in bed for a while, but couldn't turn my light on if my brother was asleep. Instead, I took my Android up on the top bunk with me and decided to play some games on my Nintendo emulator app. I played an old Dragon Warrior game with the sound off. Right on cue, no less than an hour after I got into bed, my bladder started telling me that I had to get up. So, trying to be as quiet as I possibly could, I put my phone down and got up and went to the bathroom. I did my thing, and then I came back into the room. When I opened the door, the light shone in my room for a second, and it must have bugged my brother a little bit because he grumbled something, flopped over, and was quiet again. I quietly apologized, but he didn't reply. Trying my best to not wake my brother up again, I climbed up the ladder, back onto the top bunk. I noticed when I got up there that my cell phone light was blinking green, which indicated that someone had sent me a text message. I picked up the phone, wondering who would be sending me a text that time of night. When I tapped the screen, my blood froze in my veins as I read a text from my twin brother that simply asked, "Hey bro, I'm gonna be out late with my girlfriend. Can you cover for me?" At first I thought it was a joke. My brother could have sent the text to me from the lower bunk when I was using the bathroom. It was the sort of thing that he may have done. I slowly texted him back. I thought that if he responded, I'd be able to see the reflection of the light on the wall from his cell phone. I asked him if he was joking. Immediately, he texted back and said, "No, why would you think I was joking?" I didn't see any light. I answered and said that I just saw him sleeping in the bunk below me and that I didn't find this funny at all. The text back from Ian was almost immediate. He told me that it was definitely not him in the lower bunk, and if I was not joking, I had better get out of that room immediately. Scared half to death, I grabbed my phone, skipped the ladder, and jumped off the bed and ran for the door. Despite what might have been better judgment, when I opened the door, I had to look back and see who was sleeping in my bed. Part of me still suspected it was Ian playing a joke on me. However, when the light shone on the bed, it was empty. No one was there. Freaked out and confused, I turned the light on. No one was in the bed. I crept slowly over to the bed and looked under it, half expecting to see a face looking back at me. No one was there. I looked in the closet. No one was there. I guess the fact that there was no one there should have made me not scared, but it was scarier. I ran out the door and went to my parents and explained what had happened. I hated to throw Ian under the bus like that, but if there was an intruder in the house, I thought finding that person was more important. My parents and I searched the entire house, but we didn't find anyone or any indication that anybody had broken into the house. I wasn't able to go back to bed until Ian got home. It was just way too creepy. I never knew what I saw in the bottom bunk that night. All I know is there was definitely someone there.
Deep water. We were not meant to be together, being forced into a marriage that was not supposed to happen. I was waiting for one of the families from New York. I was an accountant, and I used to look at books of all the businesses that the Giovannis had. Now, if you don't know who the Giovanni is, let me tell you in a sentence. It is a family that you don't ever want to be associated with. My uncle moved from Italy to America, and in America, He found a friend in Roberto Giovanni, who, just like my uncle, migrated from Italy to America. Giovanni's owned everything: the local shops, restaurants, politicians, the police. My uncle introduced me to Roberto Giovanni when I graduated from college. I wanted to work with the presidential candidates on his campaign. But then my uncle said, "Look, you can either work with the pricks, these politicians, or you can work for someone who puts them in his pocket and owns them." I wanted something better, so I went with my uncle and met Roberto. He was tall and built-up Italian. He patted my shoulders and, with probably a Cuban cigar in his mouth, said, "So this is the guy you've been talking about, Romano?" And my uncle replied, "Yes, Roberto. He's a good kid. Good with numbers. He knows stuff." And with his hands gesturing even more, "You know stuff, papers, laws, you know," Roberto replied. "All right, Romano. Take him to the business room. Explain to him what we do and what we want to do with our money." Then he gestured to me and came closer and said, "Also, hey kid, come over here." He took a bunch of $100 bills in his hand and said, "Buy a suit, all right? Romano will take you to the shop and buy something that stands out. If you're gonna manage business and numbers, you gotta act the part." That was the first day that I started working for Roberto Giovanni. After a few months of working for Roberto Giovanni, I had information on how much of the business and what all the other businesses did Giovanni hold in the list of all the politicians and cops that he had in his pockets. I became the main man of the operation and kept all the numbers in every detail. We were more like a family than a workplace. Roberta had a wife and 2 daughters, Talia and Rafina. Rafina was supposedly the wild one, and the one who could hold a grudge. She once got one of her lovers beaten up real bad because she saw her talking with some other girl. Don't even ask me what happened to the girl. She was batshit crazy, and I stayed the hell away from her. Talia, on the other hand, was quiet and probably was born in the wrong family. As years passed on, I had a strong hold on every information I had on the Giovannis, and now Roberto trusted me with everything. October 12th. It was a Monday morning, and it was raining as it has never. The streets were flooded with the overflowing sewers, and nothing but scum skimmed over those streets. I ran towards the house, and outside it was Roberto, drenched in rain, waiting for me as if his life depended on it. "Hurry, kid. I've been waiting for you. Where the hell have you been?" I replied, "The roads are blocked with scum water." And he held me by my shoulder and brought me closer. "Hey, kid. You're a wonderful kid, all right? And you will help me do these papers so much better. Now I am saying this because I like you like my own son, and I want you to know that the next thing that comes out of your mouth will decide your future." I looked at him, confused and clueless, and then he said, "I'm going to marry you to my daughter. Now I really would have liked you to marry Talia, but it's Rafina who you gonna be with. Don't ask me why I'm doing it. Just remember, with one yes, you'll be taking over everything." He married Rafina because he was scared that she might actually end up screwing the whole family over. Now I was the family, so all the business was open to me, and I was taking care of everything while Rafina was being a reckless woman, spending everything and making it impossible for all of us. Our marriage was good. We barely fought, probably because we didn't care enough about each other or the marriage. So the primary years of our marriage went on to understand each other, but there was none. Soon, the petty quarrels of the married life started, and Rafina always made sure who her father was. There was no way I could have won any arguments. She would always bring up her father and threaten me. I didn't care much about them because I knew Roberto wouldn't care. But one day, when me and Uncle Romano were out doing a business, Rafina went to her father and complained that I hit her, even though I didn't and I was out of town. I came back and Roberto called me in. "Hey kid, come in. How's everything?"
You feeling good? Rafina treating you good? I chuckled and I said, yeah, she can be a handful sometimes. Roberto looked at me and said, now Rafina came to me and said you slapped her. I objected in between, and he injected and continued, wait, I know you didn't. You were out doing a job I sent you to. I know it. But the thing is, my daughter, she's got the habit of having everything, and now it's too late to correct it. I just want you to know, I don't have any hard feelings for you. I love you, and you're my son, alright? Stop calling me Mr. Giovanni, and call me Dad like Rafia does, okay? Completely confused by this conversation, I started heading back to my home, and I was pretty tired from the trip, when suddenly, one of the goons of Roberto roughed me up. And now the conversation made sense. I went back home with a broken nose and saw Rafina smiling. I looked at her and said, glad my broken nose made you smile. I woke up angry. I was pissed about the whole incident, and the incident triggered something in me. There was this sudden desire for revenge that I had. I went to see Roberto the first morning. I went and he welcomed me and asked me while laughing, what happened to your nose? You're an alright kid. I'm sorry. I got to make my daughter happy too. And also, I got you both tickets for Italy. You live in 3 days. And that was it. That was my limit. I was done being controlled by a scum of a family. So I decided to take my revenge on them. I had 3 days to arrange everything. And so I packed up all the papers and all the documents. It was all a strong evidence against the family, and I gathered them all and went to the feds. I knew which one to go to. Every cop and politician was under the payroll. I had them on my list. This was a very big catch for the feds, and I did not want any part of it. So I told the feds what I wanted to do. 3 days later, I and Rafina were on a boat in Sardinia, Italy. We were getting ready to head to the sea to watch the dolphins. As soon as we entered the deep waters, we could see the dolphins emerging, and I saw her eyes sparkling. For a minute, I looked at her, and there was this rare innocence in her. But I was definite about my goal. I took out my phone and called her father, and gave the phone to her. She refused, but then I said, this could be the last time you talk to him. She snatched the phone from my hand, all confused, and turns out it was the last time that she talked to him, in the middle of the sea, in the deep waters. She found out that her dad was shot by the feds. They wanted to bring him in, but he wasn't ready to give up. She was devastated, and came in close and hugged me. I stood there for a second, and then she asked me, who would do such a thing? As she was crying and holding me, I stepped back and broke the hug. I looked at her and smiled. It was me. I made it possible. I almost kind of knew the old man would panic, but really, the feds? He thought he could outrun the feds. He was way over in his hand. Well, God rest his soul in hell. She was furious, and as she tried to charge on me, the 2 men in the boat held her. I hired the men to make sure that she doesn't act the way she is. She looked at me. Why would you do it? You're a murderer. I looked back at her and I chuckled. I did not murder him. He was killed because of his actions. He was a piece of shit. Do you know how many people has he killed or got killed? Because I know. I have their names. So, good riddance. Now her tears were all settled. So she looked at me and asked, who helped you? And I looked at her excitingly and said, wouldn't you like to know? And then I told the men to tie her up, and they did exactly what I said. They tied her up, and she was sitting down on the corner of the boat. Soon, another boat came in, and we all boarded the other boat. She was still sitting in the corner with her hands tied, and the boat was empty. It was just her, in the middle of the sea, in the deep waters. Now, I could have just killed her, but I wanted her to suffer. The boat had a bottle of water and supply that would last her 2 days. Now I gave her a choice, to come back with me and live like normal people doing normal things. Or she can act like the tough gangster daughter she is and try to make out of the place on her own. She was stubborn, so she chose to stay back on the boat on her own. So in a way, I did not kill her. She probably did it herself. I came back a week later and took care of all the legit business Roberto had and married Talia. And for the next few years, enjoyed my life to its full extent. It has been 6 years since that incident, and today, I received a letter in my mailbox, a postcard from Sardinia that said, "Hey, husband." I've worked as a mall Santa for the past few Christmases now. I'm only 33, but thanks to my complete lack of exercise routine, I definitely have the figure for it. And once I have the beard and the wig and hat combo going, there's basically no telling the difference between me and a 60-year-old dude. Mall Santa work can be tough for a few different reasons. Number one, the hours are really long, and the pay can be really terrible depending on which model you manage to get employed by. Number two, the kids can be little monsters, and their parents can be just as terrible on occasion too. But the reason I'm actually considering skipping the entire thing this year and having something of a budget Christmas is that you get some seriously disturbing things happening from time to time. I mean, the kinds of things that keep you up at night, even after a long, exhausting shift. However, the worst thing that's ever happened to me as a mall Santa was actually nothing to do with kids. Parents are terrible, paying hours. And I'm sure you'll see why after I tell you the story. So every year, usually when the mall is required is during weekday mornings, we get specially organized visits from special needs kids or adults with learning disabilities who were bussed in from the surrounding areas. Pretty much every other mall Santa I've spoken to about this agrees that it can be one of the most rewarding parts of the job, and that the adults with learning difficulties are often even more excited about the prospect of meeting Santa. And some of the kids are literally the only downside is that some of them are so heavy that my thighs hurt after having like 50 in a row sit on my lap. But other than that, it's honestly one of the best parts of the job. Last year, I'm in the middle of one of the special sessions when I get this girl coming up and sitting on my lap. I say girl, but she was legitimately a grown woman looking like she was in her mid-30s or something. But she had a mental age of about 9 or 10. All smiles and giggles, way shy about meeting Santa again. It was cute as all get out. But the interaction was not so cute, and turned that way pretty fast. So, like I said, she's all giggles and smiles as she comes up to sit on my lap, and I give her the usual spiel asking her name, how old she is, if she's excited for Christmas, and all that stuff. Then when it comes to asking her what she wants me to bring her on Christmas Eve, she starts thinking about it and smiling at first, before she suddenly gets super serious with a touch of sadness. I'm asking her if she's okay, what the problem is, and she's like shaking her head, acting like she doesn't want to tell me anything. I take the time and explaining that no matter what she asks for, I'll try my very, very best to bring it to her. No matter how big or small it is, that Santa always tries his best to bring good little girls and boys what they ask for on Christmas. She takes a moment. Then the exchange goes a little something like this. You mean it, Santa? He can get me anything I want for Christmas. Anything. Anything you want. Just tell me and I'll do my best. Okay. Well, at this point, she lowers her voice to a whisper and leans into my ear. I want my boyfriend to stop hitting me. Can you make that happen? Was sort of dumbstruck for a second. Like all of the things I thought she was going to ask, that would most definitely not have topped the list.
I remember just nodding at first, trying to find the words and being like, "Go make that happen for you. Sure, no problem." She was so happy to hear that I'd fix it for her and gave me the biggest hug I think I'd ever received while working as a mall Santa. I had to put on a huge smile. And of all the times I've had to fake being jolly and merry, that time with her was the hardest. But I just felt numb, like completely broken by what I'd heard. And I just tried my best to get through the rest of the session without bursting into tears. I remember all these thoughts rushing through my head, terrifying ideas of institutional abuse. She said boyfriend, and that made it extra creepy. Like, sure, it could have been just another guy in her care group or something. Another adult with learning difficulties who she'd hooked up with somehow. But there was nothing to say that it wasn't a member of her care team that was like abusing her in a completely different sense. To not just physically, but, well, catch my drift. So when the session was over, I approached the member of the care team that had organized the trip and accompanied them to the mall. I didn't let anything slip. I just told them how great I thought the session had gone, and that's have a few details about the group that had organized them. As it turned out, they were all from the same care home type thing. So I made a note of the name of the place as well as the name of the girl that it was apparently being abused. That night I couldn't sleep. I just kept picturing some evil monster abusing that poor girl, taking advantage of their position to put some poor special needs woman through torture, then telling her that she'd be killed if she ever breathed a word of it to anyone. And here's where stuff starts getting even more intense. Now, I could have just called 911. With the info I had at hand, registered a general complaint and then heard nothing back about it. A buddy of mine, had a cousin with the local police department, and not just some gumshoe B-cop either. They were a detective. It took some convincing, but I convinced my buddy to pass along their cell phone number so I could get in touch with the dude personally. It took a while, but I managed to get through to the guy who sounded pretty skeptical at first and seemed kind of irritated that his cousin had given me this number. But once I explained what the issue was, his tone changed completely. Now, I didn't find this out until way later from my friend, but his cousin had a special needs daughter who was probably going to have to either live with them for the rest of their life or was going to head into a group home at some point so she could have some measure of independence. So when I explained the situation with the special needs girl I met as a mall Santa, it obviously hit the guy right in the feels as the topic was so close to home. The detective tells me that he'll look into it. Thanks for letting him know. I get him to promise to tell me if anything comes up, and he says yes, and we hang up. And that was the last I heard of it for like a month. Then, maybe 5 or 6 weeks, I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing. Christmas was over the mall. Santa's job was way behind me, and I was back to working my regular hours as a self-employed mechanic. Then I get a call from a number that seems vaguely familiar, although I wasn't quite sure why. Turns out, it was my buddy's detective cousin, who reminded me of the tip that I'd given him about the care company. Of course I remembered, but by that time I really didn't think anything would come of it. But oh, how wrong I was. The detective thanks me for the information, and although he told me he couldn't say too much, he told me to keep an eye out on local media outlets. The next thing I know, it's all over the local papers that there have been a misconduct scandal involving a local care company. I picked up a copy and read the story, only to find out that it's the very same one I had reported. The long and short of it is that the cops had uncovered endemic levels of abuse in the company, stuff that varied from financial discrepancies to straight-up physical abuse. And sickeningly enough, there was even cases of care workers taking advantage of mentally disabled females in ways that were seriously inappropriate. There were numerous arrests, with some of the sleazier and violent criminals looking like they were going to get years in prison for how long they so cruelly taken advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in society. It made me sick to my stomach to read about how some people could bring themselves to do something like that. But it was stopped and I felt incredible that I'd actually managed to be a part of the chain of events that brought the whole thing crashing down. I just hope that that poor girl, who was obviously pretty traumatized by what was happening to her and just not being able to understand why it was happening, either found some measure of peace after it. And in a way, Santa did kind of bring her exactly what she wanted, even if it wasn't on Christmas Day. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a thought that never fails to make me tear up.
This problem is still technically going on, but because of recent events, I think it'll be safe to share it here. To be brief, I purchased a high chair for an upcoming baby shower. The family member already had a similar chair, and I decided to keep it for future births. A year or more passed before I was notified of a recall of that specific item. Several children had been injured by it. I took it to the store I purchased it from, just as the site instructed, to get a refund. The young man at the counter greeted me with a kind smile, and I informed him of the situation. The encounter got very weird after that. I'm not sure if he was trying to be funny, but the way he said it sounded very vindictive. "We wouldn't want one of your little angels hanging himself, would we?" It wasn't just what he said. He had a creepy smile as he said it. I became livid and demanded to talk to his manager. She soon came out of a back room, and I explained exactly what had occurred. When confronted, he insisted it was just a joke. I'm unsure of what occurred after that. The manager relieved him, and her and I completed the return. I'd go on with my life, and things were normal for the next week. The young man had all but completely disappeared from my memory. The following weekend, I found myself shopping in the very same store. My son was riding in the basket seat just like he always did. I happened to run into an old friend from high school. I was very excited to see her. I briefly lost focus on my son. My back was turned for literally no more than a minute. The two of us were talking when she pointed behind me and asked if I knew the boy who was pushing my son up and down the aisle. This caused me to come unglued. I turned to see the very same young man pushing the cart holding my son back in my direction. As the cart approached, I screamed at the man to let go. My son, who had up until that moment been having a blast, saw my reaction and began crying. Much as before, the young man had a very casual reaction to the situation. He said something to the effect of, "Oh, calm down, lady. The kid's just having fun until you started freaking out. Now he's crying. It's no big deal. You should take a chill." A crowd had begun to assemble around us. Among the group was a store manager. He asked if he could help. I explained and demanded the police be called. We all returned to the office to discuss the incident. Somehow, he managed to convince me the cops weren't needed and assured me the young man was going to be terminated. It seemed like a just punishment. So, I agreed and left the store with no intention of ever returning. Now, we come to this past week. Since the terrifying interaction I had with the young man, I had been staying close to home. Briefly, I thought that he may try to get revenge on me for getting him fired, but a month had passed without any problems. Food was starting to run low. I made my way across town to another store I sometimes shopped at. This place was actually less expensive, but I disliked the quality of their products and avoided it. My shopping experience went off with no problems, and the cashier was very courteous. It was looking as if this place wasn't that bad after all. That wasn't until I was loading my groceries into my van. Everything was put away, and I turned to return the cart to a nearby corral. As I looked up, my eyes locked with those of a young man, the very same I've been having so much trouble with recently. It was like he'd appeared out of thin air. He had a smirk on his face and seemed to get a kick out of scaring me. He quietly chuckled before speaking. "Your psycho behavior caused me to lose my job, but I wasn't fired like you wanted. I've been there so long, they just let me quit. And now I'm working here. I was hoping I'd gotten away from you, but it looks like you have some crazy vendetta against me, lady. If you know what's good for you, you won't come back here." When he finished, he turned and walked back toward the store. In a panic, I just jumped in my car and locked the doors.
I looked back and forth between the mirrors, half expecting him to just magically appear next to me. The tears came next. They lasted several minutes until I was able to regain my composure and drive away. I knew now that I had to do something. I decided to stop in at the police station to see if I could get a restraining order. An officer heard my story and told me in not so many words that I had no grounds. No matter what I said, I was unable to convince him. Eventually, he came up with an idea. He promised to talk to the young man about his behavior. It was far from what I wanted, but I was going to have to accept it. A few days passed and the officer called to let me know that they had spoken, and it had gone well. The boy agreed to stay away from me, and I assured the officer that I would do the same, and I thanked him and ended the call. As I'm writing this, the date is November 8th, a Monday. It's been 6 days since I last spoke to the young man. With little other choice, I've returned to shopping at the first store I spoke of. There's been no sign of trouble. I'm hoping the officer's talk put a little bit of fear of God into him. He sounded very confident in his assessment. I'm sure the police would know better about these things than I do. Yet there's a nagging little voice in the back of my mind, and something tells me I haven't seen the last of him.
Alexander Bean was born in the Scottish country of East Lothian. Sometime during the 16th century, his father was employed as a laborer, with duties mostly consisting of ditch digging and hedge trimming. Alexander tried to follow in his father's footsteps and take up the family trade, but realized rather quickly that the hard work and measly pay did not suit him. He is also said to have attempted to train as a tanner and become proficient in the process of treating the skins and hides of animals to produce leather. The modernity and paltry wages caused him to become fed up with the profession, but it seems he learned skills that he carried with him into later life. Skills that would not only just provide a means of living, but a great deal of infamy too. Alexander was not like other people. He was rough, ill-tempered, and violent, and he felt he simply did not belong around regular folk. So when he met a girl of similar inclinations named Agnes Douglas, nicknamed Black Agnes, due to word shock of black hair, as well as her distinctly dark personality, he knew he'd found his soulmate. Alexander's mother and father strongly objected to their union, having heard rumors that Black Agnes practiced witchcraft. So they told their son that he would be forbidden from living in the family home with his new belle should they choose to wed. The couple then chose to elope, leaving East Lothian and traveling across the Scottish lowlands, moving from place to place and surviving on what little work each of them could find. But the couple grew contemptuous of their employers, as well as the work they were doing, and one night they hatched a plan to earn some easy money. They would lay in wait at a crossroads near to a tavern, ambushing, murdering, and robbing weary travelers as they trudged towards what they assumed to be a safe haven for the night. The couple's dark deeds then took an even darker turn, when at one point, during a robbery and murder in Ayrshire, they decided on an easy way to cut their cost. Instead of using the money they stole from the victims to buy food, they would simply turn their victims into food by dragging their corpses before butchering and eating them. Alexander was used to dealing with corpses of animals and found the human corpse were all too similar to the ones he'd worked with during his tanner training. After one such incident, Agnes and Alexander dragged off the body of their victims to a coastal clave in a benign head between Gerve and Ballantrae. It was there they made a fire in which they roasted the poor soul's limbs, feasting on the flesh once it was properly cooked. The cave was almost 200 meters deep, and the couple discovered that during high tides, the entrance was almost completely blocked off to outsiders. They had managed to find themselves the perfect home, a subterranean lair from which they could launch raids into the nearby countryside, and one they could retreat to after the grisly crimes to avoid being apprehended by the law. The couple lived in the cave completely undiscovered for more than 25 years. Agnes and Alexander raised a family there, producing 8 sons and 6 daughters, who in turn birthed 18 grandsons and 14 granddaughters, all of which were products of interfamily breeding. What began as a small family grew into something that more resembled an actual clan. And as time went on, the Bean family turned their bloody work into an industry of robbery, murder, and cannibalism. They began to strip on remaining scraps of meat and organs from the victims, pickling the leftovers in barrels so they could more easily survive during the harsh Scottish winters. They also employ the rather shrewd strategy of tossing the skeletal remains of their quarry into the sea. The bones then would be washed up on beaches far from the coastal cave they called home, leading terrified villagers to believe that it was, in fact, animals that were attacking and eating travelers at completely different locations, effectively throwing them off the beaten family scent altogether. Naturally, the frequent disappearances did not go unnoticed by the local villagers, but the Bean family remained hidden in their cave during the day and only ever ventured out under the cover of darkness to claim their victims. The methods are so furtive that the villagers were completely unaware that there was a group of murderous cannibals living right under their noses. As the years went by, more and more villagers seemingly vanished from the face of the earth, and the more they did, the more the local population seemed to take note. Eventually, several organized searches were undertaken in an attempt to find those responsible for the vanishings. During one such search, it is said that a group of men noticed the coastal cave that the Bean family had called home, but were unable to believe that anything human could survive in it, and thus failed to properly explore it. But if they had, they would have discovered horrors beyond their imagining. Unable to locate the culprits, the local townsfolk became incredibly frustrated and volatile in their quest for justice. They actually ended up lynching several innocent people, brutally executing them in spite of their pleas for mercy, and totally ignoring their insistence that they were guiltless. They often suspected local innkeepers, since they almost always happened to be the last people to see the victims alive. Several were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night and hung from branches of large trees nearby. Still, the disappearances had continued. And then one night, as a married couple was returning from a local county fair on horseback, the Bean family spied their approach. They ambushed the couple, dragging the wife from her mount and savaged her as she lay in the road. Then they tried to do the same to her husband, but found he was not so easy to be overpowered. Little did they know that he was a former militiaman who was skilled in combat and carried a sword and pistol whenever he went out riding. The husband was able to hold off his attackers, but as he did so, he was forced to listen to the blood-curdling screams of his wife as the Bean family tore into her with knives and hatchets, carving her up while she was still alive. Eventually, after the husband had dispatched a fair few of the Bean family himself, a group of travelers who were also returning from the very same county fair appeared on the same trail and were horrified to have stumbled on the grisly scene that lay before them. They ran to assist the former militiamen, chasing the Bean family away with their superior numbers before escorting the newly made widower to the local magistrate to tell them of what he had experienced. Upon hearing the pure animal ferocity of the attack and how the poor, murdered wife of the former militiaman had been carved up and butchered while she was still alive, the magistrate seemed convinced that those responsible for the many disappearances over the years had finally been discovered. With local authorities sounding the call to arms, it wasn't long before none other than the Scottish King James VI heard of the horrifying atrocities. He subsequently made the decision to personally lead a search of over 600 men and several bloodhounds on a quest to find and eradicate the Bean family once and for all. Using clothing from the bodies of the slain Bean family member taken from the site of the recent county fair ambush, the bloodhounds were able to track a scent trail which led all the way back to the previously overlooked coastal cave, a benign head. Using flaming torches to eliminate the cave's dark interior, the king's men found the Bean family surrounded by the spoils of their blood-soaked pillaging. Piles of stolen heirlooms, jewelry, clothing, and gold coins littered the ground around them. But what lined the walls of the cave made the kingsmen's blood turn to ice in their veins. Chunks of meat, human meat, hung dry from ropes that were strung above their heads. Barrel after barrel was stuffed with pickled human organ meat. The smell was enough to turn a man's stomach, but it wasn't nearly as disturbing as the inbred features of the clan that cowered before them. The majority of the family, mostly women and girls, were captured alive without a fight and dragged wailing from the cave by the furious king's men. But many of the men and boys ran into the depths of the cave and refused to come out, barking out that they would kill any man that tried to take them. Instead of risking their lives to root them out, the king's men placed gunpowder at the cave's entrance, blowing the opening sky high and ensuring that anything that remained inside would surely suffocate. Those that were captured were initially taken to jail in Edinburgh before being transferred off to Glasgow. Their captors were extremely disturbed by the family's lack of humanity, both in their physical appearance as well as in their morality, seeing them as no better than animals. The king's men subjected the Bean family to summary executions, believing they were too inhumane to even store in proper jail. Alexander Bean, the family patriarch, was subjected to a terrible retribution for the crimes he had masterminded. The king's men cut off his private parts and burned them before his eyes, a visual metaphor that he would never again pass on this rotten seed. He then had his hands and feet severed and was made to bleed to death, a slow and painful end to a truly evil man. As he was dying, he supposedly screamed out, "It isn't over! It will never be over!" hinting that some of the family had actually survived the raid by the king's men. After this, Agnes and the rest of the women, along with a number of the Bean children, are tied to stakes and burned alive. There may have been some truth to Alexander's claims that some of his ilk had survived the raid, as in the nearby town of Gabon. There are those that speak of a woman who appeared amongst the populace not long after the raid of the Beans' coastal cave home. Apparently, after being interrogated by the locals regarding her origins, she admitted to being an escaped member of the Bean family, who were, by that point, infamous for their murder and debauchery. She was reportedly taken to a nearby tree and hung from a bough while the Gabon mob roared with approval. Over the years that followed, truth passed into rumor, which in turn passed into legend. And these days, there are so many who dispute that Alexander Bean and his cannibalistic family even existed. The fact that Alexander earned the nickname Sonny Bean during the time that followed is a derogatory name given the Scots by their English neighbors. There's quite a flimsy argument that the whole story was concocted by Englishmen simply to give Scotland a bad name, but a remarkably similar account can be found in a book by Nathaniel Crouch, a compiler of popular history writer, who published his work in the year of 1696. In it, he tells the tale of an incident which supposedly happened in 1459, the year before King James II's death. A passage from it reads as follows: "A thief who lived privately in a den with his wife and children were all burned alive, having made it their practice for many years to kill young people and eat them. Only one girl of the family was saved and brought up to the Dundee, who at 12 years of age was found guilty of the same horrid crime when great multitudes witnessed her execution. Wondering at her unnatural villainy, she turned toward them and with a cruel countenance said, 'What do you thus rail at me, as if I had done such a heinous act contrary to the nature of men? I tell you that if a few did know how pleasant the taste of man's flesh was, none of you would forbear to eat it.' And thus, with an impenitent and stubborn mind, she suffered a deserved death." What's clear from this testimony is that even if some of the details have gotten confused or twisted over the course of centuries that followed, there was indeed a family of cannibals up in Scotland, maybe even more than one. A family that didn't just eat human flesh because they were forced to do so out of poverty, but because they actually enjoyed it.
When my Nana was very young, she was fortunate enough to have been able to meet her great-grandmother. The women in our typically Irish family tend to have their children at a young age, so it's not unusual for one of the older members of our clan to be able to meet their great-grandchildren before they shuffle off their mortal coil. Now, her great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, always wore black. She was a scathing but witty old dear, and if she didn't like you, she would say things like, "May the cat eat you and the devil eat the cat." She was also a widow, lost her husband early on in their marriage, and stuck to her vow of perpetual mourning. The experience made her a deeply religious woman, too. I mean, every Irish person has a little of the church in them anyway, but she took her faith very, very seriously after losing her husband, and I think a lot of that is down to the circumstances in which she lost him. You see, my great-great-grandfather was a sailor in the Royal Navy, which wasn't unheard of back then since we were still subjects of the British Empire, and the ship he sailed on was named the HMS Wasp. Early one morning in the year of 1884, the crew of the HMS Wasp were given the task of ferrying a gang of bailiffs and police to this place called Inistrahall, a little island off the coast of Donegal. The police had nasty business to attend to as, on the island, 3 poor families were no longer able to pay rent to the landowner and were due to be kicked out of their houses. When the sailors found out that they were abetting such cruelty, their hearts sank. The HMS Wasp has visited them previously, delivering a few sacks of potatoes when the islands were on the verge of starvation. They knew how hard life was for the poor islanders, who somehow eked out an existence on a rock that's less than half a square mile in size. The way my Nana tells it, it was so early in the morning that the sun hadn't yet risen, but the crew of the Wasp had sailed those waters many times before, and the veil of darkness was no hindrance to them. Yet somehow, the ship managed to collide with some rocks just off of a place called Tory Island. The ship went down fast, with only 6 of the boat's passengers and crew surviving the freezing cold waters. 52 sailors, policemen, and bailiffs drowned that morning, with my great-great-grandfather being one of them. The incident was a huge scandal, and mainly because it emerged that the HMS Wasp had sunk directly within sight of a lighthouse. This meant that, by all accounts, they should have been well aware of their positioning in relation to rocks they knew well were there. So, as you can imagine, a great deal of rumor and mystery shrouded the ship's sinking, and one particular explanation seemed to capture the imaginations of the mainlanders. It was said that the folk who lived on Inistrahall Island had long been isolated from the Irish mainland and viewed mainlanders with contempt and suspicion. Hundreds of years before, Christianity had been slow to make its way over to Inistrahall, and legend speaks of a massacre that occurred there after many of the islanders refused to renounce their old gods. People said that there was still some who lived on the island that worshipped pagan deities, invoking ancient curses and performing blood sacrifices. So, when a ghastly theory emerged that the islanders had used a kind of cursing stone known as a cloc terre to sink the Wasp before it could land bailiffs on the island, people actually believed it. What's worse is that the story then tells of a local priest who heard of such ungodly practices and sailed to Inistrahall. There he located the cloc terre and promptly hurled it into the ocean to cleanse the taint of paganism from the island. The same priest then safely made it back to the mainland where, by some horrible twist of fate, slipped and fell on a walkway one day and drowned in the River Finn. People were absolutely convinced it was the curse of the cloc terre, and my great-great-grandmother was one of them. Until the day she died, she believed something unholy had risen up from the ocean to take her husband away from her. Now obviously I know that's just a silly old story my family tells, despite all my aunties swearing it's the God-honest truth. And I know because I actually did some research into the sinking of the HMS Wasp, but that didn't make what I found any less horrifying. The Royal Navy held an inquiry into the incident and were looking to court-martial the surviving sailors for negligence. Only one of the survivors had been on deck at the time of collision, and this man swore that the lights of the Tory lighthouse went dark not long before they hit the rocks. Since it was a routine journey for the crew, a junior officer was placed at the helm to gain some experience, but was so lacking in that department that he was unable to navigate in the dark, hence the ship hitting those rocks. To me, the idea of the lighthouse going dark is much more feasible than any cursing stone or what have you. But that means that the people of Tory Island colluded with the people of Inistrahall to plunge the ship carrying their tormentors into darkness. The islanders killed 52 men that morning, all to avoid being evicted from their homes. Whether or not you can blame them is another question entirely, and given that I actually lost a relative in the incident, I don't think I can give you an unbiased answer. But the fact remains that 52 people found themselves plunging into the icy waters of the Atlantic Ocean on a freezing winter's morning in complete darkness. Imagine the horror of slowly hearing the cries of your shipmates gradually falling silent until you yourself are taken by hypothermia. You certainly don't need a belief in the supernatural for that tale to give you the shivers. One night in May of 2010, the Suffolk County Dispatch Center in Long Island, New York, received a call from a terrified young woman. When asked what the nature of her emergency was, the caller replied that someone was trying to kill her. In a display of brutal honesty, the young woman admitted that she was a working girl and that a call to a client had gone horribly wrong. She added that she had successfully fled his apartment, but that she was terrified that he might be following her. When asked her location, the caller replied she was in the area of Ocean Parkway and Oak Beach, a small community located on the eastern side of Jones Beach Island. Since Oak Beach is built around the small stretch of 15-mile-long Ocean Parkway, the dispatcher told the young woman to make her way to a well-lit, open space near the highway. The plan was to position the girl in such a bright and public place that it might deter her attacker from making a move, but it also allowed nearby police units to race down the highway until the caller could see and hear their blaring lights and sirens. Again, such police activity would surely deter any potential attackers. Towards the end of their conversation, the caller is said to have said to the dispatcher, "Okay, I can see the cops now, thank you so much." The dispatcher then relayed the information to the patrol car, telling them the girl would be just a few hundred yards ahead of them. The caller once again thanked the dispatcher, then hung up the phone, apparently just seconds away from flagging down the incoming officers. But those officers say they didn't see any female in their early 20s standing by the side of the parkway. In fact, they didn't see anyone at all. They continued to prowl up and down the highway for a while just to make sure they hadn't missed anything, but there was nothing. The cops in question hoped for the best. After all, there was a chance she'd been picked up by a friend or a coworker. Maybe she'd even caught a cab or found some other method of escape. But regardless, the girl's name and description were passed along to Homicide and Missing Persons as a potential Jane Doe. 7 months later, their worst fears came true. On the morning of December 11, 2010, Officer John Myuu and his trained cadaver dog Blue were hard at work. They had been tasked with searching the surrounding area for any signs of the missing girl, and for the past half a year, they had been systematically searching and eliminating grid square after grid square in a comprehensive search for her remains. Over the course of the summer, he had unsuccessfully searched several gated beach communities in the area for any sign of the missing girl, but each time, despite scouring 1 or 2 areas that he thought were of particular interest, he had no luck. This wasn't for any lack of trying or skill either. Blue, his trusted German shepherd, was a veritable expert in finding decomposing bodies. Even if they had been buried up to a depth of around 6 or 7 feet, Blue would paw at the ground and bark, and he wasn't often mistaken. This is why, on that chilly December morning, when Blue began to alert towards the beach near Ocean Parkway, John trusted Blue to bring him results. Lo and behold, the decaying corpse of a 24-year-old female were found in an unmarked, shallow grave in the sandy earth. But that wasn't the only set of remains that Blue alerted to that day. Even with the thick vegetation and light layer of snow, the area on the opposite side of the highway proved to be nothing less than a graveyard, with Blue alerting every couple of feet. Not only were Shannon Gilbert's remains found, but the body of the missing Melissa Barthélemy was found, reduced to nothing more than a skeleton interred in a burlap sack. Police managed to recover 3 other bodies in the grassy area, that of Maureen Brainerd, Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, and the missing Shannon Gilbert. who Officer Malia had originally been looking for. All were within just 500 feet from one another. The following March, during the recovery of the other 5 bodies, the remains of one Jessica Taylor were found in a shallow grave at the side of Ocean Parkway. This was extremely worrying for investigators because what they only described as partial remains belonging to Jessica had been found 8 years earlier over in nearby Manorville. It was looking more and more likely that the cops had a serial killer on their hands, as 3 additional sets of remains were unearthed over the following month, including those of an unidentified female toddler, an unidentified Asian trans woman, and Valerie Mack, whose partial remains had been previously found in Manorville in November of 2000. Despite mounting evidence of a serial killer being at work, it took until November of 2011 for law enforcement to announce that they believed one person to be responsible for all 10 murders, that the person is most likely a native of Long Island, and that there'd be a $25,000 reward for any information leading to their arrest. As of December 2015, the Suffolk County Police had been assisted in the investigation by a number of FBI agents. The FBI stepping in was preceded by the disturbing revelation that former Police Commissioner James Burke had been blocking FBI involvement in the so-called Long Island serial killer murders and had been doing so for years. Burke resigned shortly after the scandal broke, and his reasoning behind blocking the FBI is yet to be determined. But the fact that a man so high up in the police hierarchy could deny such cases of vital material and human resources is deeply confounding. Whether or not he was trying to cover up the murders, or it was foolish pride that had him eschewing any federal assistance, it's anyone's guess. But Burke was sentenced to 46 months in prison in November of 2016 on charges of assault and conspiracy. Local police and FBI agents worked steadily on the case for almost 2 years before a Suffolk County prosecutor announced that John Bittroff, a carpenter from Manorville, was suspect in at least one of the murders. Bittroff had been convicted in May of that year of the murders of 2 female escorts in 1993 and 1994, and in June 2019, homicide detectives proposed steps to use genetic genealogy to identify the unidentified victims and possibly the Long Island serial killer himself. It's unknown that any such tests have taken place, but if they have, they certainly didn't implicate Bittroff any further, as no further attempts to charge him seem to have been made. Those affected by the murders had to wait years for any additional information, but in January of 2020, Suffolk County Police released images of a belt found at the crime scene, one embossed with either the letters HM or WH, depending on the orientation of the belt, embossed in black leather. Police believe that the belt may well belong to the Long Island serial killer himself, but would not comment on exactly where the belt was found. However, they did mention the new scientific evidence was being used in the investigation, and they had launched GilgoNews.com, a website enabling Suffolk County Sheriff's Office to share news and receive tips regarding the investigation. Even though John Bittroff had a history of murdering working girls, the complete dearth of physical evidence means we're forced to consider other suspects in the murder of some, if not all, of the victims. Homicide detectives briefly considered Joseph Brewer, an Oak Beach resident, to be a suspect, given that he was one of the last people known to have seen Shannon Gilbert alive. It was he that apparently hired her as an escort from Craigslist on the night of her disappearance, and told police that shortly after Shannon arrived at his residence, she began acting erratically, and he made no contact with her after she fled his home. Shannon was reportedly seen running through Oak Beach, pounding on the doors of homes in Brewer's neighborhood. Around this time, Shannon called 911 saying that they were trying to kill her. Police, however, did not find any evidence of wrongdoing, and Brewer was quickly cleared as a suspect. It does raise the question, though, if she was looking for refuge, would she not have simply stayed at Joseph's place? Why expose herself at such an apparently perilous moment? It also came to light that just 2 days after Shannon was declared missing, an Oak Beach resident named Peter Hackett had telephoned Shannon's mother to inform her that he was taking care of her. When she asked what he meant by that, He told her that he ran a home for wayward girls. When pressed, he hung up. He flatly denied this phone call ever took place when the police paid him a visit, but investigators proved, though, that Hackett had indeed called Shannon's mother using his cell phone records. It seemed all too much of a coincidence that Shannon's body was found just a stone's throw away from Hackett's home residence, too, and her family have stated on multiple occasions that they believe he had something to do with their daughter's death. However, police later learned that Hackett had a history of inserting himself into or exaggerating his role in certain major events, and that he had done exactly the same thing with a number of other high-profile murders and disappearances around the wider New York area. Hackett later left town and seems to have been completely rolled out as a suspect by investigating police. This leads us back to former Suffolk County Police Chief James Burke, who, if you remember, resigned his position and eventually went to prison for a series of corruption scandals. In December 2016, Shannon's family discovered that an escort had approached the police to state that she suspected that Burke might be connected to the Long Island serial killer case, confirming something they had long suspected. The escort stated that she had attended a party in Oak Beach in April of 2011, and it was at this party that she saw none other than James Burke in attendance. Not only did Burke proposition her at said party, but she also witnessed him engaging in some disturbingly violent behavior. According to her, Burke was seen dragging a woman of Asian descent along a carpeted floor by the hair. This appalling display was stopped by other partygoers, but the other girls present came to learn that Burke's violent behavior was caused by him being unable to climax during his time with the girl. The girl in question wasn't even a working girl, and the argument had only stemmed because he'd, according to her, tried to throw a few $100s at me following the encounter. I told him I wasn't a working girl, and that's when he got violent. It was evident that by this point, not only did Burke make a habit of soliciting and visiting escorts, he was also prone to violence whenever things didn't go his way. As of the time of writing, the identity of the Long Island serial killer remains a mystery, and for all we know, he is still very much at large. The disturbing aspects of former Police Chief James Burke's behavior might well just be a coincidence, and the Long Island serial killer might well turn out to be someone entirely different. But given his attempts to block FBI involvement, the murderer of 10 to 16 young women might well be one of his own blood relatives, perhaps an old friend of his who might at one point have been involved in law enforcement. It's certainly disturbing to discover an active serial killer, especially one with apparent ties to police corruption. And even though the killings seem to have subsided in the wake of intensive investigation, the Long Island serial killer may just be waiting and watching, biding his time, before he can strike again. Many years ago, my husband and I took our kids on vacation to Sri Lanka. The flights were quite tough on them. I remember my son puking his guts up because his blood sugar was so low, and my little girl's ears popped so bad that she cried for the entire descent into Colombo. I promised them that it'd be worth it, but I was also terrified that they'd just end up hating it once we were there. But thank God, my son was sold on the idea as soon as he saw some of the wildlife, and when my daughter saw miles upon miles of gorgeous sandy beaches, she too suddenly forgot how grim the 17-hour flight was. So, at one point, my husband is off taking my son down some jungle-side roads in what was basically a walking safari tour, while me and our daughter relaxed on the beach. Anna had just turned 6, so she was just a little ball of energy who burned herself out digging in the sand and playing in the surf. So as long as I keep an eye, and plenty of sunblock on her, I was free to just relax and soak up the sun. Then at one point, I just hear, Mommy, look! Doggy! I open my eyes and feel them straining from the intense sunlight, but there, clear as day, just a few hundred yards down the beach, was a dog. Anna loved dogs, and she'd point them out wherever she went, a trait that I can assure you has never left her. So I just gave her a, "Oh, isn't that nice, honey? Just remember they might not want to be petted like our dogs." I know that sounds weird, but one of the things we were warned was that there's no mass vaccination of animals in Sri Lanka, not to mention very little in the ways of formal dog training. That meant that not only were they considerably more likely to bite you should you catch one in a bad mood, but it meant that that bite could lead to some very, very nasty infections. But try explaining that to a 6-year-old. So me and my husband just went with what amounted to Sri Lankan dogs can get very grumpy because of the heat, and they don't like being petted like Nana's dog does. Knowing how grumpy intense heat made her, she ate up our excuse without many questions. So, like I said, I acknowledged the dog, then just closed my eyes again and carried on sunbathing. A minute later I hear, Mommy, look, another doggy." Again, I open my eyes, make myself a little sun visor with my hand, and look down the beach to see 2 dogs this time. They're both these blonde mongrel things, their breed indistinguishable as the result of probably hundreds of years of unchecked breeding. They hadn't caused us any trouble at that point, because as much as they were actually wild dogs, they were still quite chilled out. The beach cafes fed them leftovers to keep them sweet, so they spent most of their days just sleeping to beat the heat. Trouble was, they were decidedly unpredictable, and could be your average tail-wagging good boy one minute, then something distinctly different the next. So, as I said, I look up to see 2 dogs this time. They were playing in the sand, getting close to the water, then rushing back whenever a wave crashed in. Admittedly, it was very sweet, so I watched them playing for a minute before my eyes begin to close over again. A bit more time goes by, longer than between the first 2 of Anna's dog sightings. Then all of a sudden, I hear, Mommy, look, Mommy." This time, Anna is much further down the beach than the first 2 times she'd called me, and there's not 1 or 2 additional dogs on the beach. There's an entire pack of them. There must have been about 20 different dogs on the beach for the 3rd time I opened my eyes. There was a tiny little Jack Russell, some long-eared spaniel type, dogs of all shapes and sizes. But the one that was apparently leading the pack was this giant, moody-looking Doberman. It was quite surreal, actually, seeing a pack of feral dogs just wandering around together like that. I can't speak for everyone, but where I'm from, you'd never actually see a stray dog roaming the streets, or not at least anymore. A lost dog maybe, but a legitimate pack of strays? Not a chance. But in Sri Lanka, seeing what appeared to be a live-action version of an all-canine Disney film was a relatively common occurrence. At first, I give a little chuckle and reach for my phone to get a picture. But just as I do, I give the whole scene another look. 6-year-old daughter, pack of stray dogs. She's slowly wandering towards them. They're paying her increasingly more attention as more and more dogs stop playing and begin to look in her direction. It was this huge uh-oh moment, and as it hit me, I got up, took my flip-flops off in preparation to run, and started calmly calling out for Anna to walk back to me. I tried my best to keep calm, I really did, but Anna must have been able to just detect the panic in my voice. She stops to look around to me, this nervous look on her face, and as she does, the dogs start walking down the beach towards her, one by one. I was saying, "Walk back to Mommy, Anna. Walk back to Mommy," trying to emphasize the walking part because I knew the dog would only chase her if she ran. They were all staring her down, ears pricked up, and I'm praying for them to just stay put, but as Anna looked back, saw that they were closer, and started to run, they gave chase. What I felt next, I don't think I can even call it fear. I had to put myself in between those dogs and my daughter, even if it meant me getting hurt. That's just what a mother does. I wouldn't even say I'm a particularly brave person, but I didn't think twice, and I suppose that just speaks to the power of motherly instincts. I sprint forward, position myself between Anna and the charging dogs, then begin banging my flip-flops together, screaming. I waved my arms in the air, jumped up and down, banging the flip-flops intermittently, and I must have looked like an absolute maniac, but my God, did it work. If all those dogs just carried on rushing me, they could have taken me down in seconds, but my wild display had them literally stopping in their tracks. Or rather, once I'd managed to psych the Doberman out, the rest lost their spunk. I still remember it like it was yesterday, seeing him or her make this goofy, scared dog face before it literally skidded in the sand, turned tail, and ran away. As I turned around to comfort the now hysterical Anna, I realized that pretty much everyone that was sunbathing, chilling in beachside cafes, or swimming had emerged to watch. And I do mean watch. Not a single one of them came to check on us, and in the end, it was actually some little Sri Lankan surfer type that ran over to ask if we were okay. He was swiftly followed by the owner of the cafe we'd been visiting. He checks us over, sees that we haven't been bitten, then invites us back up to the cafe's patio. Within seconds, he presents my daughter with a huge bowl of chocolate ice cream, and the man was a genius in my mind. She went from absolutely inconsolable to gently sobbing to fine within about 15 minutes. Don't get me wrong, she was still a bit freaked out following the whole thing. Anyone would be. But we palmed her off by saying they just wanted to play. But they might get a little rough, so it's best to stay near mommy and daddy whenever there's lots of doggies around. This made sense to her, and she was back to thinking Sri Lanka was the best place ever in no time. I suppose this has been a quite long-winded way of saying that no, it's not a terrible idea to take your kids on vacation to more exotic places. Yes, there can be risks, but I honestly feel like the net benefit is high enough to make it totally worth it. Just be sure to do your research, and remember that a seemingly harmless situation can turn into a dangerous one in a remarkably uncomfortable amount of time. It's taken me a long time to tell this story. I'm 27 years old now, and this happened to me when I was 14. My name is Adam, and I have one older brother named Seth. I haven't seen Seth in 13 years. I have no idea where he is, or even if he's still alive, but I do know why he left. Seth was 2 years older than me, and we were very close. Although all brothers tend to get into scuffles with each other, with Seth and I, they were few and far between. For the most part, he and I did everything together. He taught me how to fish. He let me play football and baseball with him and his older friends. Although Seth was bigger and stronger than I was, he always sold me to other people like I was superior to him. He told people I was smarter than him. He told them I was the talented brother who was going to be so much more successful than anyone could dream of. I really loved him, and he was easily the best friend I have ever had. Around the time I turned 14, however, Seth began acting very odd. At first, I don't think my parents thought much of it. He was wearing black all the time and seemed like he was really depressed. Rather than hanging out with me or even his friends, he took to spending a lot of time alone in his bedroom. He obviously kept the lights off all of the time as well, because there were no lights coming from under the door. It may have seemed like typical 16-year-old boy sort of stuff, and that is likely why my parents didn't pay it any mind. But I was closer to Seth than they were. I knew him better than they did, and I knew that this was not typical teenage stuff. Hell, I was a teenager at the time, going through a lot of that myself. With Seth, it was something more. I would walk by his room at night, and I would hear him talking to someone. I never heard another voice, and I always chalked it up to the fact that he must have been talking on his cell phone. But the conversations were never pleasant. Whomever he was talking to, Seth was always at odds with that person. Whatever it was that was bothering my brother, he never told me. He never was angry with me either. He would say hello if I greeted him, and he always offered me a friendly, if not extremely worn-out smile. But rather than do anything else or say anything else to me, Seth would immediately go into his room, lock himself in there, and I wouldn't see him again for the rest of the day. After a couple of months of this behavior and no sign of stopping it, I was sitting at my computer doing some homework. I was having a difficult time with it, so I decided to take a break and chat with some friends on Yahoo Messenger. This was long before the days when Skype and Facebook were the norm. I got a message from an unknown user. I don't feel comfortable sharing the real name, so I will just call it Yahoo Stranger 1. This person sent me a message telling me, "If you don't keep far away from Seth, I'm going to kill you." At first, I was too alarmed to say anything, but after I composed myself, I messaged the person back. I told him that Seth was both my brother and my best friend, and I would hang out with him whenever I wanted. The person didn't respond. I kept sending him a message asking who he was, but he only responded, "You've been warned." I wanted to confront Seth about this, but he refused to talk about it. When I mentioned the message to him, there was a little bit of recognition in his eyes, but he just forced a very wary smile, tousled my hair, and told me there was nothing to worry about. He would take care of it. That was the very last time I ever saw my brother. The following day, he didn't come out of his room to go to school. I went up and knocked on his door at my mom's request, but he didn't answer. My parents tried to get him out of his room as well, but the door was locked and he didn't answer. My parents had to eventually pick the lock on the door, and when we went in, Seth wasn't there. What's more is that many of his things were gone, and there was a note on his bed that simply said, "Goodbye." My parents, of course, called the police and went through the whole missing child procedure. But it wasn't until I curiously turned on the monitor to Seth's computer that I got a little bit of information on what was going on. The very first thing I noticed was that Seth's Yahoo Messenger was up and there was an open conversation. The conversation was with my screen name, and Seth's screen name was Yahoo Stranger 1. It was him that had sent me that message. Seth had also left his cell phone behind. I suppose this was to keep our parents from being able to track him. Remember all those times I thought I heard him arguing on the phone with someone? He had no calls in his history other than from my parents. If he was arguing with someone, it was not on the phone. But the true scariness came from the fact that there was a long and detailed conversation on the Yahoo Messenger. It was between Yahoo Stranger 1 and the screen name that we knew was Seth's. The conversation was horrid. Yahoo Stranger 1 was telling Seth over and over again to hurt me. There were these grisly and disgusting things that the messenger was telling him to do, and Seth's responses were adamant that he loved me and he wasn't going to hurt me. There was a message that night, the one after I told Seth about what had happened, that was the scariest. Yahoo Stranger 1, who I assumed now was Seth, told Seth to kill me. Seth refused and argued with him and pleaded with Yahoo Stranger 1 to leave him alone. I could tell in the messages that the conversation was causing my brother a lot of pain. Trying to figure out how Seth could have been having an instant messenger conversation with himself, I looked at the timestamps of the messages, and each one was at least 5 minutes apart. He had the passwords saved on his messenger for both accounts. I figured he had to sign out and sign on both names repeatedly, answering the messages since Yahoo only allows you to send offline messages. I don't know if Seth is schizophrenic or if he has dissociative identity disorder, or if Yahoo Stranger 1 really was a different person. But what I am sure of is that the constant threats against me were what was weighing heavy on my brother all those months. And I have no doubt that the reason my brother, my best friend, left was that he was afraid that he actually was going to hurt me. I keep hoping he'll come back one day. He's my brother, and I love him, and I could never be scared of him.
This happened about 5 years ago. I had just started a new job at a bank that I don't wish to name, and my trainer was a really nice guy. For whatever reason, the other person who was supposed to be joining me on the training, who had also gotten the same job as me, didn't actually turn up. So, it was just me and him. We got along really well. He was really funny, charming, seemed to really like me. He started to touch me gently from time to time, caressing my arms whenever I did something well, and I honestly enjoyed the attention, but I knew it was slightly inappropriate. Now at my job, we have this messenger system that we always use internally, and we were always chatting about non-work related stuff there. There was a time I was caught giggling in my cubicle, and I was worried my manager would start asking questions or check my IT history, as they can do that. It wasn't long before he asked me out, and I giddily accepted. It was only after we started having a romantic relationship that I realized how much of a creep he was. He was into BDSM pretty hardcore, stuff I have no interest in. And on our very first date, he was very explicit in telling me how he liked this kind of stuff and really wanted to try them out on me. Yeah, it was not the very best thing to say on a first date, as it was an instant turnoff. Especially when he told me that when he was younger, he liked hurting animals. He said he loved taking his father's shotgun and loved to shoot bunnies. He made it a point to say that he loves to shoot them, especially the bunny ones, because they're slower. Yeah, after that, our date didn't last very long. I faked that my crab was not that good and made my stomach upset, and I got a taxi home. When I went to the office the next day, I tried my level best to seize all conversation with him. I made a lame excuse that my manager was tracking my internet activities, and thus I have to act more professionally. He wasn't really happy with that, and that is when the stalking started. He started following me to the bathroom to try to talk to me. He would take his breaks at the same time as me, try to sit at the same table. When I was running errands around town, he would come and follow to talk to me on the way. I was getting really uncomfortable, and it was not pleasant at all. To cut the long story short, I ended up telling my manager everything, and the next day, when I got to work, he wasn't there. Turns out that I wasn't the only girl he had done this to, and the manager at the office was fed up. He was fired, and I'm really glad that I don't have to see him anymore. I hope I don't have to ever again.